My name is Vivian, 33 years old. When my husband passed away, his wealthy boss called me and said I found something. Come to my office right now. Then he added, do not tell your sister or your stepmother. You could be in danger. When I got there and saw who was waiting, I froze. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. The dirt on my husband David's grave was barely settled when the vultures descended. We were still standing in my living room, wearing our black funeral clothes, suffocating in the heavy silence. Jamal, my African-American brother-in-law, and the flashy chief financial officer at Vanguard Horizon stepped forward. He reached into his suit jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slammed it onto my glass coffee table. The sharp smack echoed like a gunshot. It was an invoice from the funeral home for $25,000. Jamal adjusted his custom silk tie and sneered down at me. David's credit card declined, Vivian, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I had to cover the burial costs myself so our family would not look like a joke in front of the country club. I know you only make minimum wage doing data entry, so I am going to do you a favor. Sign over the title to David's BMW to me right now. That will cover your debt. You have no business keeping a luxury car. Before I could process the sheer audacity of demanding a grieving widow's only vehicle, my stepmother Brenda stepped into the center of the room. She did not come to defend me. Instead, she walked over to the box on the console table that held David's personal effects from the hospital. She reached inside and pulled out his Rolex. Without a hint of hesitation, Brenda unbuckled the heavy silver band and dropped the watch into her handbag. I am keeping this as a family heirloom, Brenda announced smoothly, ignoring the shock on my face. Let us be honest, Vivian. We all know my daughter Chloe's money practically bought this watch. Jamal is the one bringing in the real wealth while David was just coasting by. Chloe. My half-sister and the golden child of the family stood next to Jamal. She was casually examining her manicured nails, not even pretending to care about the man we had just put in the ground. Honestly, Vivian, you should be thanking Jamal, Chloe said, crossing her arms over her expensive dress. If he had not stepped up, David would have been buried in some pauper's grave. You need to accept reality. You cannot afford this house either. We should list the property by next week. I looked at my half-sister. She had always received the new cars and the expensive tuition, while Brenda forced me to pay rent just to live in my own bedroom. Now Chloe was casually discussing selling the house my husband and I had bought together, barely 2 hours after his funeral. I stood silently in my living room absorbing the robbery of my late husband's belongings. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a struggling clerk who relied on her spouse. They had spent my entire life treating me like a disposable burden, the scapegoat, who was supposed to just accept whatever crumbs they threw my way. I do not have all day, Vivian, Jamal barked, clapping his hands together to break my silence. Go get the keys to the BMW. We are taking it today. You can take the bus to your little cubicle on Monday. Listen to him, Vivian, Brenda chimed in, adjusting her pearl necklace. It is the responsible thing to do. You have always been terrible with finances. We are actually saving you from ruin. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw them out. But my mind was already shifting into overdrive, analyzing the situation the way I had been trained to do. They were too eager. The aggressive demand for the car, the swift confiscation of the watch, the push to sell my home immediately. It felt less like family greed and more like a calculated liquidation. You are not selling my house, Chloe, I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. And nobody is taking David's car. Jamal let out a loud, mocking laugh that filled the room. Your house, please. Without David's income, you will default on the mortgage in a month. Just sign the car over, Vivian. Do not make this ugly. You know you cannot fight us. I watched Jamal smirk, convinced he had me trapped in a corner. I watched Brenda clutch her purse, confident she was entitled to everything she could grab. They had no idea who they were actually dealing with. I took a deep breath, preparing to order all three of them out of my sight. But before I could utter a single syllable, the silence of the room was pierced by a sharp vibrating sound. My cell phone, resting on the same glass table next to that ridiculous funeral invoice, lit up with an incoming call. Jamal's eyes flicked downward toward the glowing screen. I watched the arrogant smirk instantly vanish from his face. The color completely drained from his cheeks, leaving him looking like he had just seen a ghost. Chloe and Brenda noticed his sudden panic and leaned in to look at the screen as well. The name flashing in bright white letters was one they all recognized. Marcus Sterling, the billionaire owner of Vanguard Horizon, the most powerful man in the city, and the ultimate boss of both my late husband and Jamal. Everyone in the room instantly froze, completely solid in total shock. I snatched the phone off the glass table before Jamal could reach it. My fingers curled tightly around the device, feeling the cold metal edges pressing into my palm. I ignored the burning glares of my stepmother and half-sister and walked straight out the back door onto the patio. The cold Boston rain hit my face, washing away the suffocating air of the living room. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart pounding a steady rhythm against my ribs. "Mr. Sterling," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and professional. "Vivian Marcus," Sterling said. His voice was gravelly and urgent, completely lacking any of the usual polished corporate charm I expected from a Wall Street titan. "Listen to me very carefully. I found something. Come to my office right now." I narrowed my eyes, staring out at the manicured lawn. I glanced back through the glass sliding door. Inside, Jamal was pacing like a caged predator, gesturing wildly to Chloe, while Brenda crossed her arms, her eyes darting toward the patio with deep suspicion. "What did you find?" I asked, shielding the phone from the wind. "David's fatal car crash was no accident," Sterling said. A brutal, icy shiver ran down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. My husband had been an excellent driver. The police claimed his brakes failed on a steep incline. I never believed it. "Do not tell your sister or your stepmother. Do not tell Jamal. Just get out of that house and come to the Vanguard Horizon Tower. You could be in extreme danger." The line went dead with a sharp click. I stood in the freezing rain for exactly 5 seconds. I did not collapse into a puddle of despair. I did not scream out to the heavens. My husband had been murdered, and the people highly likely to be responsible were standing right inside my living room, casually arguing over his car and his expensive watch. I took a deep breath, smoothing my features into a mask of pure, terrified confusion, and slid the glass door open. As soon as I stepped back inside, the atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. Chloe immediately dropped her bored, arrogant posture. She rushed toward me across the hardwood floor, her face twisting into a mask of exaggerated concern. She forced out a few fake tears, grabbing my cold hands in her warm, perfectly manicured ones. "Vivian, you need to listen to us right now," Chloe cried, squeezing my fingers tight. "We did not want to tell you this today of all days, but you leave us absolutely no choice. Jamal found out why Mr. Sterling is calling you. It is about David." I widened my eyes, playing the naive, helpless widow they so desperately expected me to be. "What about David? What did Jamal find?" Jamal stepped forward, adjusting his custom suit jacket, puffing out his chest with sheer self-importance. "Your husband was a federal criminal, Vivian. I caught him embezzling $5 million from Vanguard Horizon. He was shifting corporate funds through dummy offshore accounts for months. Sterling just found out today, and he is coming for blood. That phone call was a threat. He is going to send the police, and they are going to arrest you as an accomplice." I stared at him, letting my mouth fall open in feigned shock. $5 million, David would never do that. He was an honest man. "He did it?" Brenda snapped, stepping up behind Chloe and crossing her arms. "And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for marrying a criminal. You will lose everything you own unless you let Jamal fix this mess." I looked at Jamal, letting my shoulders slump in defeat. "How can you fix a $5 million deficit?" Chloe tightened her grip on my hands, her fake sympathy making my stomach churn. "We are your family, Vivian. We are going to protect you. Jamal can quietly pay back the firm using his own corporate authority, but we need solid collateral right now. You need to sign over the deed to this house to Jamal today. We will sell the property, cover David's stolen money, and keep you out of federal prison. You will lose the house, but you will keep your freedom." The sheer brilliance of their toxic greed almost impressed me. They were using a dead man as a convenient scapegoat to steal my real estate and cover their own tracks. Jamal was framing David for his own corporate theft, and Chloe was packaging it as a loving family favor. I ripped my hands away from Chloe and stumbled backward, letting out a loud, ragged sob. I clamped my hands over my mouth, hyperventilating on command. I let my knees buckle just enough to look weak, collapsing onto the arm of the expensive leather sofa. I cannot go to prison, I gasped, forcing hot tears to stream down my cheeks. Please, Jamal. I do not know anything about $5 million or offshore accounts. I just buried him. I just put my husband in the ground 2 hours ago. Then sign the deed right now, Jamal demanded, pulling an expensive gold pen from his pocket and thrusting it toward me. I cannot do it today, I sobbed, burying my face in my hands and rocking back and forth. Please, Chloe. Give me 48 hours, just 2 days to pack my clothes and clear out David's memories. I will sign the house over to you on Monday morning. I promise. Just give me 48 hours to say goodbye to my home. Chloe exchanged a long, calculating look with Jamal. Jamal gave a short, arrogant nod. He thought he had completely broken my spirit. He thought I was just a terrified data entry clerk begging for mercy from the powerful men in the room. Fine, Chloe said, her fake tears drying up instantly as her voice turned cold. You have until Monday morning. Be packed and ready to leave the premises. Do not make us call the police on you, Vivian. Brenda patted her designer handbag, ensuring David's Rolex was still safely tucked inside. We are doing you a massive favor, Vivian. Try to show some basic gratitude for once in your miserable life. Without another word, the three of them turned and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the silent, empty house. The second the lock engaged, my ragged breathing stopped entirely. My shoulders straightened. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, my face hardening into a mask of absolute icy focus. The weak, grieving widow was gone. I walked past the glass coffee table, ignoring the massive funeral invoice. I went straight to the large stone fireplace at the back of the living room. I knelt on the hearth and counted 4 stones up 3 stones across. I pushed firmly on the loose brick. It slid backward with a soft scrape, revealing a hidden fireproof safe built directly into the chimney cavity. I quickly dialed in a 6-digit biometric code. The safe beeped and popped open. I reached inside and pulled out a heavy matte black laptop. It was not a standard commercial computer. It was a heavily encrypted military-grade terminal I used for my highest-level forensic audits. Jamal thought he could frame a dead man. He thought he could steal from my home and walk away wealthy. He had no idea he had just declared war on a woman who could dismantle his entire financial existence with a few keystrokes. I opened the laptop, watched the screen glow to life, and grabbed my car keys. I snatched the phone off the table before Jamal could reach it. My fingers curled around the metal casing. I ignored the burning glares of my stepmother and half-sister walking straight past them. Stepping onto the back patio, the cold Boston rain hit my face, washing away the suffocating air of the living room. I pressed the phone to my ear, my heart pounding against my ribs. I kept my eyes fixed on the lawn. Mr. Sterling, I answered, keeping my voice level. Vivian Marcus Sterling said. His voice was gravelly and laced with urgency that lacked his usual corporate charm. Listen to me very carefully right now. I found something. You need to come to my office immediately. I narrowed my eyes, the wind whipping my hair. I glanced back through the glass. Inside, Jamal was pacing like a predator, gesturing wildly to Chloe. Brenda had her arms crossed, eyeing the patio with suspicion. What did you find? I asked. David's fatal car crash was no accident, Sterling said. A brutal shiver ran down my spine. My husband had been an exceptionally careful driver. The police claimed his brakes failed. I never believed their report. Do not tell your sister or your stepmother a single thing, Sterling continued. Do not tell Jamal anything. Just get out of that house and come directly to the Vanguard Horizon Tower. You could be in extreme danger. The line went dead. I stood in the freezing rain. I did not collapse. My husband had been murdered, and the people likely responsible were standing right inside my living room. I took a deep breath, smoothing my features into a flawless mask of terrified confusion, and slid the glass door open. The moment I stepped back inside, the atmosphere shifted. Chloe dropped her bored posture. She rushed toward me, her face twisting into a mask of exaggerated concern. She forced out fake tears, grabbing my cold hands. "Vivian, you need to listen to us," Chloe cried, squeezing my fingers painfully tight. "We did not want to tell you this today, but you leave us no choice. Jamal found out exactly why Mr. Sterling is calling you. It is about David." I widened my eyes, playing the naive assistant they desperately expected me to be. "What about David? What did Jamal find?" Jamal stepped forward, adjusting his custom suit jacket. "Your husband was a federal criminal, Vivian. I caught him embezzling $5 million from Vanguard Horizon. He was secretly shifting corporate funds through dummy offshore accounts. Sterling just found out today, and he is coming for blood. That phone call was a threat. He will send the police, and they are going to arrest you as an accomplice." I stared at him, letting my mouth fall open in feigned shock. $5 million, David would never do that. He was an honest man. He did it, Brenda snapped, stepping up right behind Chloe and crossing her arms tightly. "And now you are going to pay the ultimate price for marrying a criminal. You will lose everything you own unless you let Jamal fix this mess." I looked at Jamal, letting my shoulders slump in total defeat. "How can you possibly fix a $5 million deficit?" Chloe tightened her grip on my hands, her fake sympathy making my stomach churn. "We are your family, Vivian. We are going to protect you. Jamal can quietly pay back the firm using his own corporate authority, but we need collateral now. You need to sign over the deed to this house to Jamal today. We will sell the property, cover David's stolen money, and keep you out of federal prison. You will lose the house, but keep your freedom." The sheer brilliance of their toxic greed almost impressed me. They were using a dead man as a convenient scapegoat to steal my real estate and cover their own tracks. Jamal was framing David for his own corporate theft, and Chloe was packaging it as a loving family favor. I ripped my hands away from Chloe and stumbled backward, letting out a loud, ragged sob. I clamped my hands over my mouth, hyperventilating on command. I let my knees buckle just enough to look incredibly weak, collapsing onto the arm of the expensive leather sofa. "I cannot go to prison," I gasped, forcing tears down my cheeks. "Please, Jamal. I know nothing about $5 million. I just put my husband in the ground 2 hours ago." "Then sign the deed right now," Jamal demanded, pulling an expensive gold pen from his pocket and thrusting it toward me. "I cannot do it today," I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. "Please, Chloe. Give me 48 hours. Just 2 days to pack my clothes and clear out David's memories. I will sign the house over to you on Monday morning. I promise. Just give me 48 hours to say goodbye to my home." Chloe exchanged a calculating look with Jamal. Jamal gave a short nod. He thought he had completely broken my spirit. "Fine," Chloe said, her fake tears drying up instantly as her voice turned cold. "You have until Monday morning. Be packed and ready to leave." Without another word, the greedy family turned around and walked out the front door. The heavy oak door clicked shut, leaving me completely alone in the silent house. The second the lock engaged, my ragged breathing stopped. My shoulders straightened. I wiped the fake tears from my cheeks, my face hardening into a mask of absolute icy focus. I walked to the large stone fireplace. I knelt on the hearth, counting 4 stones up, 3 across. I pushed firmly on the loose brick. It slid backward, revealing a hidden fireproof safe. I dialed the biometric code and pulled out a heavily encrypted high-tech laptop. Jamal thought he could easily frame a dead man to cover his tracks. He had absolutely no idea what was coming for him next. I drove home through the relentless Boston rain, Marcus Sterling's encrypted access token burning like a live coal in my coat pocket. I ignored the chilling silence of my empty living room, bypassing the kitchen to head straight down the wooden stairs into the damp, unfinished basement. This was my absolute sanctuary. I flipped a heavy breaker switch on the wall. A bank of high-resolution monitors hummed to life, casting a harsh blue glow across the concrete walls as I slammed the heavy laptop onto the metal desk. I inserted Sterling's token into the side port. The screen immediately flooded with cascading lines of green code. I was bypassing Vanguard Horizon's external security firewalls in seconds. Sterling had given me the keys to his kingdom, granting me total ghost access to every server and hidden archive within his empire. Jamal thought he was untouchable. He assumed his position as chief financial officer, gave him absolute cover, severely underestimating the digital footprint left behind by human greed. I cracked my knuckles, my fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard with blistering speed. I bypassed the secondary internal security nodes, slipping past the corporate intrusion detection software undetected. I was looking for the $5 million deficit. Jamal had not just wired the money out. That would be too obvious. He had built an elaborate, dizzying maze of phantom transactions. I traced the initial missing funds to a series of dummy vendor accounts registered in Delaware. From there, the money fragmented into dozens of smaller, seemingly legitimate consulting invoices paid out to shell companies operating in Nevada and Wyoming. He was using an automated script to siphon small fractions of capital during high-volume trading hours, masking the theft within Vanguard's massive daily cash flow. It was a sophisticated laundering operation designed to look like standard corporate overhead. But every digital transaction leaves a shadow, a tiny anomaly in the metadata that forensic accountants are trained to hunt. I cross-referenced the payout timestamps with Jamal's personal terminal login history, finding a perfect, undeniable match. I isolated the fragmented transactions and initiated a reverse compilation algorithm tracking the money trail as it bounced off servers in Panama and Cyprus. I broke through a final layer of encrypted routing protocols. The destination materialized on my center monitor in stark white text. It was a private numbered offshore bank account located in the Cayman Islands. I ran a brute force decryption protocol against the offshore bank's external shell, slipping through a digital fracture to pull the account holder's raw registration data. The screen refreshed. Jamal's full legal name, his secondary social security number, and his private residential IP address flashed before my eyes. The current account balance sat at exactly $5,200,000. It was sitting there quietly collecting untaxed offshore interest. This was the irrefutable proof. I had everything I needed to completely clear David's name. Hand Marcus Sterling, the head of his corrupt executive, and send my arrogant brother-in-law to federal prison for a very long time. But I stared at the glowing screen, my heart pounding with a cold, ruthless rhythm. Sending him to prison was no longer enough. Sterling wanted Jamal destroyed professionally, but I wanted to salt the earth he walked on. I wanted to completely dismantle the arrogant, toxic reality he and my half-sister enjoyed. I kept digging. I bypassed Vanguard's servers entirely and used my backdoor access to tunnel directly into Jamal's personal digital ecosystem. I wanted to know exactly why a man making a high seven-figure salary felt compelled to steal $5 million from a ruthless billionaire. Greed was always a factor, but a theft this sloppy reeked of sheer, blind desperation. I mirrored his personal smartphone and accessed his private email servers. I sifted through thousands of encrypted messages, banking alerts, and secure calendar appointments. Then I found a hidden folder buried deep within a secondary cloud drive. It was a shadow ledger. I opened the file, my eyes scanning the staggering columns of digital debt. Jamal had been playing a very dangerous game. He had secretly leveraged millions of dollars in highly volatile, unregulated cryptocurrency markets. He thought he was a financial genius capable of beating the global crypto algorithms. He was disastrously wrong. A massive margin call had wiped out his initial investment 3 months ago. He had desperately chased the losses, pouring in more money, completely liquidating his own savings and stock portfolios. When those funds vanished, he had panicked. He had needed an immediate, massive influx of liquid cash just to cover the crippling interest payments before the shadow exchange liquidated his remaining physical assets. That was the primary catalyst for the Vanguard Horizon theft. But the stolen $5 million was just the tip of the iceberg. I traced the origins of the catastrophic crypto loan itself. The unregulated shadow exchange had required hard physical collateral to issue a line of credit that massive. They demanded an asset with unimpeachable real estate value. I pulled up the digitized loan contract. I scrolled down to the collateral agreement section, expecting to see Jamal and Chloe's luxury penthouse listed. Instead, my breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer to the monitor, reading the heavily notarized property deed attached to the crypto loan. Jamal had not risked his own home. He had quietly forged digital power of attorney documents. He had pledged Brenda's historic multi-million-dollar country estate as the sole collateral. My greedy, arrogant stepmother had ruthlessly stolen my dead husband's watch just hours ago, entirely convinced she was a wealthy, untouchable matriarch. She had no clue that Jamal had secretly placed her immaculate, debt-free mansion on the chopping block to fund his gambling addiction. If Jamal defaulted on this toxic loan, the shadow exchange would legally seize Brenda's pristine estate, leaving her entirely homeless. I sat back in the dark, cold basement, a slow, dangerous smile finally spreading across my face. I closed the laptop, the soft click echoing in the silent, damp basement. The glowing screens faded to black, but my mind was racing with numbers, offshore accounts, and the sheer audacity of my enemies. I walked upstairs and lay down on the cold bed, catching a few hours of restless, vigilant sleep. The sharp scrape of metal turning in a heavy deadbolt jolted me awake. I sat bolt upright, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I glanced at the digital clock resting on the nightstand. It was barely 7 in the morning. Heavy, unfamiliar footsteps echoed loudly on the hardwood floor downstairs, followed instantly by the shrill, piercing sound of my stepmother's voice barking orders. I threw on a thick robe and hurried down the winding staircase. Brenda and Chloe were standing right in the middle of my foyer, completely ignoring the fact that they were trespassing in my home. Beside them stood a short, balding man carrying a heavy clipboard and a laser measuring tape. "What are you doing in my house?" I demanded, tightening the belt of my robe and adopting a posture of terrified confusion. Brenda waved a silver key in the air, the metal catching the morning light. "David gave me a spare key years ago for absolute emergencies," she stated, her tone dripping with arrogant entitlement. "And this is clearly a financial emergency. Meet Mr. Gable. He is a certified real estate appraiser. We need an exact, aggressive market valuation of this property before Monday morning so Jamal can expedite the corporate buyout and save your miserable life." The appraiser did not even bother to look at me. He walked straight past us into the living room, aiming his laser pointer at the crown molding. Chloe trailed right behind him, her nose wrinkled in absolute disgust as she ruthlessly scrutinized my furniture. "This open concept layout is incredibly dated," Vivian, Chloe announced, running a perfectly manicured finger along the edge of my dining table as if searching for dust. "We are going to have to completely rip out these cabinets to get top dollar from any serious buyer. You really have zero eye for modern design. But then again, you never did appreciate high-value real estate. Remember when Mom kindly let you live with us when you were 16? You complained constantly about that basement bedroom." "It was unfinished concrete covered in black mold," I fired back, my voice trembling with manufactured hurt. "I had chronic bronchitis for an entire year." "You were ungrateful then, and you are ungrateful now," Brenda snapped, cutting off my weak defense. She marched over to the kitchen island, slamming her expensive leather tote bag onto the pristine marble counter. She unzipped it aggressively and pulled out a thick stack of heavy legal documents. "Come here, Vivian. We have much more urgent business to handle this morning." I walked slowly toward the island, wrapping my arms around myself to project absolute weakness and submission. "What is that?" I asked, keeping my gaze lowered to the floor. "It is a primary beneficiary waiver," Brenda said, tapping a sharp acrylic nail against the top page of the legal stack. "Jamal did some extensive digging late last night. We know David had a $2 million comprehensive life insurance policy through Vanguard Horizon. Since his death is now directly tied to federal corporate embezzlement, those specific funds are highly scrutinized by the government. If you try to claim that massive payout directly, the federal investigators will immediately freeze your bank accounts and charge you with criminal conspiracy." Chloe stepped up beside her mother, nodding with solemn fake sincerity. We are trying to save you from a massive federal indictment, Vivian. You are clearly not equipped to handle millions of dollars or deal with ruthless government auditors. You would crack under the pressure in 5 minutes. So what exactly are you suggesting? I asked, letting my voice crack perfectly on the last word. You need to sign this waiver immediately, Brenda commanded, sliding the heavy stack of papers across the cold marble counter. It officially surrenders your primary beneficiary status and legally transfers the entire $2 million policy directly to Chloe. She has a pristine financial record. She will manage the funds properly, filter the money through a clean corporate trust, and use it to politely help Jamal cover David's remaining corporate deficit. I stared down at the dense legal paperwork. The sheer, unadulterated evil of their coordinated plan was staggering. They were not just stealing my home to cover Jamal's catastrophic crypto loan debt. They were systematically stripping away every single asset David had left behind to secure their own luxury lifestyle. They wanted to leave me utterly destitute, facing the street with absolutely nothing, while they pocketed $2 million in clean, untraceable cash. I cannot just sign away David's life insurance, I pleaded, squeezing my eyes shut to force a fresh wave of hot tears down my cheeks. It is all I have left of him. How am I supposed to pay my basic bills? How am I supposed to survive out there? You will figure it out, Chloe said dismissively, checking her reflection in the dark microwave glass. Get a second job. Downsize to a studio apartment in the suburbs. Millions of normal people do it every single day. Do not be so overly dramatic. Sign the paper, Vivian, Brenda ordered. Her voice dropped a full octave, turning ice-cold and blatantly threatening. Do not make Jamal pick up the phone, call Marcus Sterling, and hand you straight over to the federal authorities. You sign this waiver right now, or you leave this beautiful house in handcuffs before noon. I let out a ragged, defeated sob, bowing my head in complete submission. I walked over to the kitchen island, dragging my feet. My hands shook violently as I reached out. I deliberately ignored the heavy gold pen Brenda offered me. Instead, I reached deep into the pocket of my thick robe. I pulled out a sleek, matte, black fountain pen I always kept on me for reviewing physical forensic audit files. Fine, I whispered, letting a single tear drop dramatically onto the pristine marble counter. I will sign it. Take it all. Take every last cent. Just please keep me out of prison. I clicked the pen open with a soft snap. I pressed the nib against the signature line on the final page of the comprehensive waiver. I wrote my full legal name in sweeping, highly legible cursive. I flipped back and initialed the 3 adjoining pages, dating each one meticulously to ensure the document looked completely binding. Brenda snatched the heavy documents right off the counter the second my pen lifted from the paper. She inspected the wet signature, a wide, triumphant smirk spreading across her heavily contoured face. She looked up at Chloe, giving a sharp, arrogant nod of absolute victory. They had won. They had successfully bullied the weak, grieving widow into surrendering a multi-million-dollar fortune without a single fight. Good girl, Brenda sneered, stuffing the signed waiver aggressively back into her designer tote bag. Mr. Gable will finish his interior measurements in 20 minutes. Do not get in his way or bother him. Come along, Chloe. We have an urgent meeting at the bank to file these forms. They turned perfectly in sync and marched out the front door, leaving the appraiser snapping bright flash photos of my living room walls. I stood frozen in the center of the kitchen, my head still bowed in apparent crushing defeat. But the absolute second the heavy front door slammed shut, my tears vanished instantly. My posture straightened, the trembling leaving my hands. I looked down at the matte black pen resting quietly in the palm of my hand. It was a specialized high-grade auditing tool I used to mark temporary forensic discrepancies on physical corporate ledgers. The ink inside the barrel was a highly sensitive thermal disappearing ink. At standard room temperature, it looked exactly like permanent black ink. But the chemical bonds were intentionally unstable. Brenda had just shoved the documents into a black leather bag. She was about to walk out into the freezing Boston rain and get into a cold car. The moment the ambient temperature of that ink dropped below 50 degrees, the chemical structure would permanently dissolve. By the time Brenda sat down in the warm bank manager's office and proudly pulled out those papers to claim her stolen millions, she would be staring at a stack of completely blank pages. I gave Brenda and Chloe exactly 8 hours to revel in their imaginary victory. By 6 o'clock that evening, I pulled up the digital tracking beacon I had stealthily installed on Jamal's company phone months ago. The glowing red dot on my monitor had stopped moving, settling comfortably at the address of the Sterling Cut, the most ultra-exclusive, obscenely expensive steakhouse in downtown Boston. Jamal was hosting a celebratory dinner. He was toasting to his brilliance, convinced he had successfully bought my $2 million home and stolen David's life insurance in a single flawless sweep. I closed my laptop and walked over to the hallway mirror. I needed to look the exact part of a broken, desperate widow. I dragged my fingers aggressively through my hair, pulling the strands out of their neat arrangement until they hung in a tangled, disheveled mess around my face. I removed my makeup, leaving only the dark, exhausted circles under my eyes. I swapped my tailored blazer for a slightly oversized, wrinkled trench coat that made my shoulders look slumped and frail. I was going to give them a flawless performance. The Boston rain had finally stopped, leaving the downtown streets slick and reflecting the neon city lights. I parked my sedan 2 blocks away from the Sterling Cut and walked the rest of the distance, letting the damp evening wind chill my skin. The restaurant's exterior was an intimidating fortress of black marble and tinted glass, guarded by a pair of massive mahogany doors. I pushed through them, ignoring the immediate disapproving glare of the sharply dressed host. The dining room smelled of aged leather, expensive cigars, and seared Wagyu beef. Low amber lighting cascaded over the wealthy patrons murmuring in their private leather booths. I did not wait to be seated. I knew exactly where Jamal would be holding court. I navigated through the labyrinth of candlelit tables, keeping my head bowed, playing the role of the intruder who knew she did not belong in this atmosphere of extreme wealth. I found them in the VIP alcove at the back of the restaurant, elevated slightly above the main dining floor. Jamal sat at the head of the heavy oak table, his custom silk suit catching the amber light, a massive glass of scotch resting in his hand. Chloe sat to his right, wearing a backless designer gown, laughing loudly at something he had just said. Brenda sat opposite them, slicing into a thick, rare steak with aggressive precision. A bottle of vintage champagne sat chilling in a silver bucket beside a plate of untouched caviar. They were celebrating the financial slaughter of my life. I walked slowly up the short ramp to their private alcove, letting my shoes scuff heavily against the carpet. I stopped right at the edge of their table. The moment Chloe saw me, her shrill laughter died instantly. Her perfectly contoured face twisted into a mask of absolute revulsion. "What on earth are you doing here?" Chloe hissed, her eyes darting around the restaurant to see if anyone important had noticed my disheveled arrival. "You look like a homeless person, Vivian." Jamal laughed loudly, a booming, arrogant sound that drew the attention of nearby tables. He leaned back against the red leather booth, throwing his arms wide open in a gesture of supreme dominance. "Let her stay, Chloe," Jamal declared, his voice carrying easily over the soft jazz playing in the background. "It is good for her to see how the real players live. Look at you, Vivian, trembling, pathetic, completely out of your depth. You always were. You know the fundamental law of the universe. The weak exist strictly to feed the strong. It is the natural order of things, especially for a woman of your particular background. You are too stupid to keep your husband alive, and you are far too weak to keep your house. But do not worry, I will make sure the property goes to someone who actually deserves it." His blatant toxic arrogance was suffocating. He was openly mocking David's death and making thinly veiled racist and sexist jokes in a crowded restaurant, entirely emboldened by his own perceived invincibility. "You promised to give me until Monday," I stammered, letting my voice crack and shake, forcing my eyes to dart nervously between the three of them. "I just need a little money for the weekend. The accounts are frozen. I have absolutely nothing left to buy food." Brenda let out a sharp, condescending snort. She dropped her steak knife, reached into her designer purse, and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She crumpled the money into a tight ball in her fist. "You are an absolute embarrassment to this family," Brenda snarled, her voice dripping with pure venom. She flicked her wrist, throwing the crumpled $100 bill directly at my chest. The paper ball bounced off my coat and landed on the floor near my feet. "Take your pathetic grocery money and get out of our sight before I have security drag you out into the alley where you belong." I stared down at the crumpled bill resting on the expensive carpet. I let my shoulders shake, forcing a look of complete and utter humiliation onto my face. I slowly dropped to my knees, bowing my head in front of their table like a defeated peasant gathering scraps. "I am so sorry," I whispered, my voice trembling with fake broken gratitude. "Thank you, Brenda. I will not bother you again. I promise." As I knelt there on the floor, perfectly positioned beside Chloe's chair, I reached out with my left hand to pick up the crumpled money. Simultaneously, my right hand slipped into the deep pocket of my trench coat. My fingers brushed against a tiny matte black disc, no larger than a standard watch battery. It was a military-grade voice-activated audio bug with a localized transmission radius. Chloe's expensive open designer handbag was resting on the floor merely inches from my right knee. I kept my head bowed, playing the role of the broken widow flawlessly. In one fluid, practiced motion, I picked up the cash with my left hand and seamlessly flicked the microscopic audio bug upward with my right thumb. The tiny device dropped silently into the dark side pocket of Chloe's open handbag. I stood up slowly, clutching the crumpled bill against my chest. I gave them one final look of absolute terrified defeat, then turned and scurried away through the crowded restaurant. As I walked out the heavy mahogany doors and back into the cold night air, my posture straightened entirely. The fake tears vanished. The audio bug was planted. Every single conversation they had, every boastful confession about offshore accounts and corporate theft, would now be broadcast directly to my basement servers. The digital hunt was over. The execution had just begun. I drove back to Beacon Hill with singular purpose. The rain had started again, lashing against the windshield in heavy, angry sheets, but I barely registered the weather. My mind was already miles ahead, calculating the data streams waiting for me at home. As soon as I entered the silent house, I bypassed the kitchen entirely and descended the wooden stairs into the damp chill of my digital war room. I flipped the main breaker, watching the bank of high-resolution monitors ignite with that familiar, harsh blue glow. I sat down heavily at the metal desk and immediately routed the incoming audio signal through a high-frequency noise filtration software I had coded myself. The military-grade bug I had slipped into Chloe's designer handbag was a masterpiece of surveillance technology. It possessed a dynamic microphone capable of isolating human voices over dense background noise. I put on my noise-canceling headphones. The transition was instantaneous and jarring. I was no longer sitting alone in a cold, unfinished basement. I was transported right back inside the VIP alcove of the Sterling Cut. The audio clarity was chillingly perfect. I heard the sharp clink of heavy crystal glasses meeting in a celebratory toast. I heard the soft rhythmic bass line of the restaurant's live jazz trio playing near the bar. And I heard the familiar grating laughter of my stepmother and half-sister. Brenda was loudly praising her own ruthless negotiating skills, bragging to the table about how she had broken my spirit in record time this morning with the insurance waiver. Chloe agreed enthusiastically, her voice increasingly slurred and heavy from the vintage champagne they were consuming like water. They were celebrating their perceived victory, completely oblivious to the digital snare tightening rapidly around their throats. For the first hour, the feed consisted entirely of their toxic vanity and bottomless greed. Jamal ordered another $2,000 bottle of wine. Brenda complained viciously about the slow service. I recorded every single second, logging the metadata directly to the Vanguard Horizon forensic file on my encrypted server. But I needed much more than just their casual arrogance. I needed the explicit, undeniable confession that Marcus Sterling demanded to bring the full weight of the federal government down on Jamal. Around 10 o'clock, the dynamic in the alcove shifted. I heard the distinct sound of a heavy wooden chair scraping backward against the restaurant carpet. Brenda announced she was leaving to catch a late red-eye flight to New York, eager to start shopping for new designer furniture with her anticipated windfall. The heavy thud of the mahogany doors closing signaled her departure. Now it was just Jamal and Chloe left alone at the table. The alcohol had completely stripped away any of their remaining filters. Jamal's voice dropped to a conspiratorial, boastful register. I cranked the master volume on my headset, leaning closer to the center monitor. "We actually did it!" Chloe giggled, the sound wet and sloppy in my ears. "We own that massive house, and we are going to cash out David's life insurance before she even knows what hit her." "You are a financial genius, Jamal." Jamal let out a low, arrogant chuckle. I heard the clink of a glass being set down heavily on the oak table. "I told you I would handle the Vanguard situation," he said, his words blurring together at the edges. Sterling was getting too close. His internal auditors were sniffing around the dummy Delaware vendor accounts. I needed a massive, undeniable distraction, and David was the perfect naive scapegoat. I held my breath, my fingers hovering silently over the keyboard. I initiated a secondary hard drive recording backup. He was talking. He was finally talking. "But how did you know it would actually work?" Chloe asked, her tone completely devoid of any empathy. "How did you know David would not just march directly into Sterling's office and expose the missing funds himself? He was always so ridiculously honest." "Because I made absolutely sure he never made it to that meeting," Jamal sneered. A block of solid ice formed in my stomach. The ambient noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away entirely, leaving only the chilling, remorseless sound of Jamal's voice broadcasting directly into my ears. "What do you mean?" Chloe asked. "I mean I paid a mechanic in South Boston $50,000 in untraceable cash to slice the brake lines on his luxury sedan," Jamal stated. He said it casually, as if he were discussing a minor stock trade or a golf handicap. "The incline on Commonwealth Avenue is notoriously steep. By the time David realized the brakes were completely gone, he was already doing 60 miles an hour toward the intersection. The police chalked it up to catastrophic mechanical failure, an unfortunate fatal accident." I squeezed my eyes shut, a wave of pure white-hot fury washing over my entire body. I gripped the edge of the metal desk until my knuckles turned bright white. My husband had been brutally murdered. His life was deliberately snuffed out to cover up a sloppy corporate theft. And the man who orchestrated the execution was currently sitting in a luxury steakhouse, drinking expensive wine and bragging about the kill. I waited for Chloe's reaction. I braced myself for a gasp of horror, a scream, a single shred of basic human decency. My sister had known David for 10 years. She had eaten dinner at our table. She had smiled in our wedding photos. Instead, I heard the soft rustle of silk as she leaned closer to Jamal. "Is the mechanic reliable?" Chloe asked. Her voice was flat, highly calculating, and entirely devoid of shock. "Can he be traced back to us?" I opened my eyes, staring blankly at the green audio waveform spiking across my screen. She did not care that David was dead. She only cared about her own legal exposure. Jamal scoffed loudly into the microphone. "Relax, the guy is a degenerate gambler with heavy ties to the Russian syndicate. I used a burned phone and a proxy runner to drop the cash. He does not know my real name, he does not know what I look like, and he is certainly not going to the police to confess to a contract killing. The trail is completely dead. We are clear, Chloe. We won." I exhaled a long, shaky breath. I had the murder confession recorded in pristine, high-definition audio. It was enough evidence to put Jamal away in federal prison for the rest of his natural life. But my digital hunt had already revealed the deeper systemic rot. Jamal had leveraged Brenda's historic estate to a dangerous shadow crypto exchange. He was still desperately trying to outrun a massive financial execution. I stared at the offshore Cayman Islands account still open on my right monitor. The $5 million was sitting right there, a digital smoking gun, waiting to be fired. I just needed to forward the encrypted routing data to Sterling and the authorities. But then Jamal's voice cut through the audio feed again, destroying my timeline entirely. "We have one final move to make tonight," Jamal announced, the ice clinking loudly in his glass. I am not leaving that Vanguard money sitting in the Caymans. The federal investigators might actually find the offshore proxy if Sterling pushes them hard enough. What are you going to do? Chloe asked, her tone shifting to nervous excitement. I already set up the automated transfer protocol, Jamal bragged. At exactly midnight tonight, that entire $5 million automatically shifts from the Cayman Shell account into a highly secure, completely anonymous Swiss banking vault. The Swiss account uses a rotating decentralized encryption key. Once that money drops into the vault at midnight, it vanishes from the global grid entirely. It becomes completely untouchable. Sterling can send every forensic auditor on Wall Street, and they will never find a single dime. We will be filthy rich, and your miserable sister will take the absolute fall for everything. I sat frozen in the damp basement, my eyes darting frantically to the digital clock in the corner of my primary monitor. It read 10:45. I had exactly 1 hour and 15 minutes. If that stolen money moved to the Swiss account, the physical evidence of the embezzlement would evaporate into the dark web. Jamal would possess untouchable wealth, and I would be left holding the fabricated corporate wreckage. The murder confession was powerful, but without the physical money trail linking Jamal directly to the stolen Vanguard funds, a highly paid defense attorney could argue the audio was illegally obtained or taken wildly out of context. I needed the money locked in place to execute the perfect trap. The execution phase had suddenly become a desperate high-stakes race against a digital clock. I grabbed the keyboard, violently pulling up the Cayman Islands routing protocol. I had to intercept a $5 million automated wire transfer before midnight, while the architect of my husband's murder sat 2 miles away, toasting to his own brilliance. My grief transformed instantly into a weaponized, singular focus. The tears were gone, replaced by a cold, mechanical precision that took over my hands. The digital clock in the corner of my right monitor ticked relentlessly. 11:10, 11:20. I kept the audio feed isolated in my headphones. I heard the abrupt end to their dinner, the scraping of heavy oak chairs, and Jamal barking at the valet to bring his car around. They were leaving the steakhouse and heading straight back to Jamal's luxury penthouse to finalize the transfer. I needed a backdoor into his private network, an entry point that would bypass his expensive corporate firewalls. I turned my attention to the forensic audit files I had stolen from Sterling's office. Marcus Sterling was a notoriously paranoid auditor. I knew he would never trust Jamal with millions of corporate dollars without installing a hidden leash. Digging deep into the source code of Sterling's compliance software, I found it. A diagnostic backdoor designed to monitor executive fund movement in real time. I hijacked the protocol, aggressively rewriting the access credentials. Within 10 minutes, I had granted myself full, undetected administrative control over Jamal's personal desktop. By 11:45, the basement was freezing, but a thin layer of sweat coated my forehead. My center monitor flickered, establishing a mirrored feed of Jamal's penthouse computer. Over the audio bug, I heard the heavy, solid thud of his double doors swinging open, followed by Chloe's high-pitched laughter, echoing off vaulted ceilings. I heard the clinking of crystal tumblers as Jamal poured them another round of expensive liquor. He was celebrating, completely oblivious to the fact that I was currently residing deep inside his network, watching his every digital move. A new window suddenly popped open on my mirrored screen. The Cayman Islands offshore banking portal. He was logging in. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, the rapid clacking echoing sharply in the quiet basement. I could not simply block the transaction. If the transfer failed with a generic error code or a timeout sequence, Jamal would immediately panic. He would pick up his phone, contact his offshore broker, and manually move the funds through a secondary physical proxy. I had to let him initiate the automated transfer, but I was going to radically alter its final destination. I opened a secure command terminal and rapidly began coding a customized algorithmic strike. It was a digital tripwire designed to execute the exact microsecond the funds left the Cayman Shell account. On the mirrored screen, I watched Jamal confidently setting the transfer parameters, prepping the stolen $5 million to vanish into a decentralized, untraceable Swiss banking vault. I bypassed his routing logic entirely. I wrote a script to intercept the data packet mid-transit, stripping away the Swiss routing numbers and replacing them with a new destination architecture. I redirected the massive flow of illicit corporate funds straight into the lap of the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. But simple tax evasion was not nearly enough to satisfy the rage burning in my chest. David was dead. They had murdered my husband for money, and I wanted absolute unmitigated destruction. I wanted the kind of federal response that involved heavily armed agents, seized passports, and assets frozen worldwide. I dug into the financial routing metadata and embedded a highly classified federal anti-terrorism and money laundering flag directly into the core of the transfer packet. It was a catastrophic red flag. The absolute second that money hit the banking node, international financial security protocols would trigger automatically. The system would instantly lock down every single bank account, credit card, and corporate asset connected to Jamal's name. It was a digital death sentence, a financial guillotine hanging directly over his head. The clock on my monitor struck 11:56. Over the audio feed, Chloe's voice drifted through my headphones, breathless with unrestrained greed. She asked Jamal if the money was ready, if they were finally in the clear. Jamal let out a cruel, drunken sound of absolute victory. He bragged to her that their financial worries were permanently erased. He proudly declared that putting David in the ground was the most profitable business decision he had ever executed. My hands shook with a violent surge of adrenaline. I hovered my index finger over the enter key, my algorithmic strike loaded, primed, and waiting. 11:58. On the mirrored screen, I watched Jamal's cursor move across the offshore banking portal. He reviewed the $5 million balance one last time. He checked the automated Swiss routing numbers, completely unaware that those numbers were now nothing more than a digital mirage. 11:59. In his luxury penthouse, Jamal dragged his mouse across the screen. I watched the cursor hover directly over the bright green button labeled Transfer. "Do it," I whispered into the cold, empty basement. Over the audio bug, I heard him click the mouse. I slammed my finger down on the enter key, launching my strike simultaneously. My code intercepted his command instantly. It hijacked the $5 million, wrapped the illicit funds in glaring federal anti-terrorism flags, and slammed the entire packet directly into the government firewall. Jamal leaned back in his leather chair, waiting for the standard green confirmation receipt to assure him he was rich. Instead, my mirrored monitor showed exactly what Jamal was staring at in his penthouse. The entire screen flashed a violent, blinding red. A stark, unyielding alert boxed out his browser, locking down his entire system with a message that would end his life. Account frozen. Federal investigation pending. Jamal slammed his fists onto the imported mahogany desk, rattling the empty crystal tumblers. He stared at the violent red warning dominating his screen. The words burned into his retinas, a digital death sentence. He frantically clicked the mouse, refreshing the browser, pounding the escape key, but the catastrophic alert remained absolute. Chloe stirred on the leather sofa across the room, complaining about the noise, completely oblivious to the financial apocalypse unfolding mere feet away. Jamal ignored her. He spent the next 7 hours locked in a state of hyperventilating terror. The sun rose over the Boston skyline, casting long, cold shadows across the penthouse. Jamal had not slept a single second. His custom-tailored silk shirt was drenched in a cold, sour sweat, clinging uncomfortably to his back. His hands shook violently as he paced the length of his living room. He snatched up his untraceable burner phone and dialed his offshore private broker in the Cayman Islands. The line rang 5 times before the broker finally answered. The man sounded terrified, his voice an octave higher than usual. "What did you do?" Jamal demanded, his voice a hoarse, desperate whisper. "Where is my $5 million? Unfreeze the account right now." "I cannot touch it, Jamal," the broker stammered, the panic evident in every syllable. "It is gone. The entire architecture is locked down." An anonymous high-level auditor executed a backdoor override. They slapped a federal anti-terrorism and money laundering protocol directly onto your routing sequence. Do you understand what that means? The IRS, Criminal Investigation Division, has assumed total control. The feds have a digital stranglehold on your entire life. Do not ever call this number again. The line went dead. Jamal stared at the burner phone, his breath catching in his throat. He threw the device against the floor-to-ceiling window, shattering the plastic casing into a dozen pieces. Breathing heavily, he rushed back to his desk and began frantically logging into his domestic financial portals. He tried his primary checking account at Chase. Access denied. He pulled up his secondary corporate accounts. Frozen pending review. He scrambled to his hidden cryptocurrency ledgers, the emergency funds he kept entirely off the grid. Account suspended. The federal flag had cascaded through the global financial network like a digital virus. The algorithm I deployed had worked with ruthless efficiency. Every single bank account, credit card, and shadow portfolio connected to Jamal's name was locked tight. He had absolutely zero liquidity. He could not buy a plane ticket. He could not hire a defense attorney. He could not even buy a cup of coffee. He was effectively broke, trapped in a luxury penthouse with no escape route. Chloe sauntered into the living room wearing a silk robe and holding her phone with a deeply annoyed expression. "Jamal, my platinum card just declined at an online boutique," she complained, crossing her arms. "Fix it. I need to order my outfits for our victory trip to Paris." Jamal turned slowly, his eyes wide and feral. The polished, arrogant corporate shark from the steakhouse was gone. In his place stood a desperate, cornered animal. "There is no Paris!" Chloe, Jamal roared, his voice echoing violently off the vaulted ceilings. He marched across the room and grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her slightly. "We have nothing. The federal government just froze every single cent to my name. Someone tipped them off. I am completely locked out of the grid. I have zero liquidity." Chloe stared at him, her annoyed expression rapidly dissolving into stark terror. "What do you mean we have nothing? What about the Vanguard money? What about the 5 million gone?" Jamal shouted, releasing her and pacing frantically. "Frozen. Untouchable. We need raw, untraceable cash right this exact second if we are going to hire fixers and bribe our way out of this country before the feds show up at the door with handcuffs." He stopped pacing, his eyes locking onto Chloe with a dangerous, calculating intensity. "The house," he muttered, his mind working in overdrive. "Your mother has the signed waiver. David's house is worth $2 million fully paid off. It is the only clean asset we technically control right now." "It is Saturday," Chloe argued, her voice trembling. "We cannot close a real estate deal on a weekend." "I know a distressed property buyer who specializes in hostile takeovers," Jamal snapped, already reaching for his secondary desk phone. "He pays straight cash, 60 cents on the dollar, no questions asked. I will call him right now, but he needs vacant possession. He will not buy a property with a squatter living inside." "So what do we do?" Chloe asked. "You are going to that house right now," Jamal ordered, his eyes wild with unhinged desperation. "Take the signed paperwork. Do not wait for Monday. Do not wait for the lawyers. You go over there and you physically force Vivian out into the street today. Throw her clothes on the pavement and change the locks. Break her. I do not care what you have to do, but I need that house empty and ready to sell by noon. Go." 2 miles away, the morning was quiet and peaceful. I stood in my pristine kitchen wearing a comfortable cashmere sweater, listening to the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a fresh cup of dark roast coffee, letting the warm steam rise against my face. I had slept remarkably well. The digital hunt was over, and the physical execution was moving exactly according to my calculated schedule. A sudden violent pounding shattered the morning silence. Someone was hammering their fists against my heavy mahogany front door, shaking the frame. I did not flinch. I did not drop my mug. I casually reached over and tapped the security monitor resting on the marble kitchen island. The high-definition camera feed showed Chloe standing on my front porch, her hair wild, her designer coat thrown hastily over her clothes. She looked frantic. She slapped a bright yellow, aggressively printed eviction notice directly onto the glass panel of my door. "Get out of my house, Vivian!" Chloe screamed through the thick wood, her voice muffled but perfectly audible. "I own this property now. Pack your bags and get out right now. I stood in the quiet kitchen, sipping my coffee, watching her throw a desperate temper tantrum on my porch. They were panicking. Jamal had hit the invisible wall I built, and now they were scrambling for the only lifeline they thought they had left. But they were relying on a stack of completely blank papers resting inside Brenda's leather tote bag. I smiled, setting my coffee mug down on the cool marble counter. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my heavily encrypted specialized mobile device. I opened a direct, highly secure communication channel. I did not type out a long explanation or a plea for help. The trap was sprung, the prey was cornered, and it was time to bring the real hammer down. I typed 3 simple words to Marcus Sterling: Initiate Protocol Phoenix. The eucalyptus-infused steam of the VIP relaxation suite curled around Brenda, clinging to the heavy gold-flecked silk of her imported robe. She took a slow, deliberate sip of her vintage champagne, letting the crisp bubbles dance on her tongue, while the ambient spa-curated acoustic music played softly in the background. The morning had been an absolute, unmitigated triumph. She had spent the last 4 hours indulging in the luminous platinum caviar facial, a ridiculously extravagant $5,000 treatment that she felt she entirely deserved. After successfully bullying Vivian into surrendering the $2 million life insurance policy yesterday, Brenda felt untouchable. She envisioned the massive influx of clean cash, the new designer wardrobes she would commission, the extensive renovations she would finally order for her historic estate. The weak always existed strictly to feed the strong, and she had feasted perfectly. She adjusted her posture on the heated marble lounger, checking her flawless reflection in the vanity mirror. She looked revitalized, powerful, untouched by the messy, pathetic grief that had consumed her stepdaughter. A soft knock broke her reverie. The spa director, a usually fawning woman named Giselle, stepped into the private suite. Giselle carried a silver tray holding the final invoice, but her signature customer service smile was conspicuously absent. Instead, she looked rigid, her shoulders tense, deliberately avoiding Brenda's direct gaze. "I trust the treatments were to your liking, Mrs. Sterling," Giselle said, her voice strained tight and unnatural. "Flawless as always," Giselle, Brenda replied. She did not bother to look up as she reached deeply into her designer leather tote. She retrieved her exclusive titanium black card and tossed it carelessly onto the polished silver tray. "Put a 20% tip on it. I am in a highly generous mood today." Giselle took the tray and retreated quickly. Brenda finished her champagne, already mentally planning her afternoon shopping itinerary on Newbury Street. She needed a new striking outfit for the celebratory dinner she planned to host tonight. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Brenda frowned, her irritation mounting rapidly. She despised waiting for anything. The suite door opened again. Giselle returned, holding the titanium card between 2 perfectly manicured fingers. She did not have a receipt for Brenda to sign. "I am terribly sorry, Mrs. Sterling," Giselle began, her tone shifting entirely from subservient to strictly coldly professional. "There seems to be a significant issue with your payment method." The card was declined. Brenda let out a sharp, condescending laugh. She stood up abruptly, tightening the belt of her gold robe with a vicious yank. "That is completely impossible, Giselle. That card has no preset spending limit. You clearly ran the transaction incorrectly. Take it back to the terminal, override the security chip, and run it again immediately. Do not come back into this suite until the transaction is approved." "I already ran it 3 separate times," Mrs. Sterling, Giselle stated. Her voice dropped a full octave, losing all remaining warmth. "I even called the Elite Merchant Authorization line directly. Your issuing bank has placed a hard security freeze on the account. They instructed us to confiscate the card immediately, but I am simply returning it to you out of professional courtesy. We require alternative payment for the $5,000 balance right now." Brenda snatched the titanium card from Giselle's hand, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson beneath her expensive facial serums. She felt a sudden sharp spike of adrenaline, a completely foreign sensation of public embarrassment. How dare this glorified esthetician speak to her with such blatant disrespect? "This is an absurd banking error," Brenda snapped, her voice turning venomous and shrill. I am a premier tier client at Vanguard Fidelity. I will have the regional branch manager fired for this sheer incompetence before noon. Give me exactly 5 minutes. She stormed past Giselle into the private dressing alcove, slamming the heavy oak door shut behind her. She tore off the spa robe and quickly pulled on her tailored trousers and silk blouse, her hands shaking with pure, unadulterated rage. She snatched her phone from her purse and aggressively dialed her private wealth manager, Richard. Richard had handled her family estate accounts for 15 years. He always answered by the second ring, groveling, apologetic, and eager to please. The line rang 4 times, 5 times. Brenda ground her teeth together. Finally, a sharp click signaled the connection. Richard Brenda barked instantly, not allowing the man a single syllable of greeting. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain to me why my titanium card just declined at a public spa. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? You lift this security freeze this exact second, or I am pulling my entire estate portfolio from your branch by the end of the day. Mrs. Sterling, a voice replied. It was not Richard. It was a cold, unfamiliar woman with the sterile, relentless cadence of a corporate auditor. Richard is no longer assigned to your portfolio. My name is Agent Davis with the Federal Compliance Division. Brenda stopped buttoning her silk blouse. The air in the small dressing room suddenly felt thin and suffocating. What are you talking about? Where is Richard? I demand to speak to my wealth manager. I demand my accounts be unfrozen right this instant. Your accounts are not frozen due to a security glitch, Mrs. Sterling, Agent Davis stated flatly, ignoring Brenda's demands entirely. They have been seized. Every liquid asset, every checking account, and every credit line tied to your social security number is currently locked under a federal default protocol. Default! Brenda shrieked, her voice bouncing sharply off the tiled walls. I have zero debt. I own my historic estate free and clear. I possess generational wealth. I do not default on anything. The auditor did not raise her voice. She simply read from a digital ledger with chilling precision. According to our records 30 days ago, a highly leveraged massive cryptocurrency margin loan was executed using your primary historic estate as the sole collateral. Brenda's breath caught in her throat. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs like a trapped bird. Crypto. She whispered the word, tasting like foul poison. I despise cryptocurrency. I have never touched the shadow market. This is blatant financial fraud. The margin call was issued at exactly midnight last night. Agent Davis continued, completely unfazed by Brenda's rising panic. The required collateral to maintain the digital position was $5 million. The funds failed to materialize. Because the margin call was completely missed, the lender executed the default clause. The bank is foreclosing on your estate by the end of business today. The immediate eviction paperwork has already been filed with the county clerk. Brenda clutched the edge of the marble vanity, her perfectly manicured nails scraping against the cold stone. Her historic estate, the sprawling property that had been in her family for 3 generations, the massive mansion that defined her entire social standing and power in Boston. It was gone. It was being ripped away from her before sunset. This is a mistake, Brenda gasped, her chest heaving as the walls of the dressing room seemed to close in around her. I never signed a single loan document. I never authorized a margin call on my own house. You have to trace the signature. You have to find out who submitted that fraudulent paperwork immediately. I am looking directly at the authorization logs right now, Agent Davis replied, her tone dropping to an absolute, freezing absolute. The loan was not initiated with a forged signature, Mrs. Sterling. It was legally executed through a verified digital proxy, using the comprehensive financial power of attorney you authorized last year. Brenda's mind raced violently. Power of attorney. She had only granted that level of sweeping, unrestricted financial control to one single person. She had signed those complex legal papers thinking she was securing her legacy, handing the reins to a man she believed was a Wall Street prodigy. Read me the exact name on the digital authorization, Brenda demanded, her voice turning into a low, dangerous growl. The auditor clicked a few keys on her end. The silence stretched for 3 agonizing seconds. The executing signature belongs to your son-in-law, Agent Davis said. Jamal. The phone slipped from Brenda's hand, clattering loudly against the marble floor. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman entirely broken and stripped of her armor. The golden boy. The brilliant financial savior who had promised to double their wealth. He had secretly leveraged her generational home, betting everything she owned on a highly volatile, illegal shadow market. Jamal had built his entire empire on sand, and when the tide came rushing in, he had used Brenda as a disposable human shield. She had spent the entire morning happily celebrating the destruction of her stepdaughter, completely blind to the fact that her own son-in-law had already gutted her alive. Brenda dropped to her knees on the cold tile, her hands balling into tight, shaking fists. Her immaculate features contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage, a silent, vicious scream tearing through her throat as she realized she had absolutely nothing left. Brenda did not stay on the cold tile floor for long. The shock paralyzing her system rapidly mutated into a kinetic, violent energy. She scrambled to her feet, ignoring the spilled champagne and the bewildered spa staff hovering outside the suite. She did not bother to fix her smeared facial serums or properly button her silk blouse. She snatched her keys from the vanity and practically ran to the private parking garage. Her silver Mercedes careened out of the exit tires, squealing against the concrete as she broke every speed limit heading toward Beacon Hill. She knew exactly where Jamal and Chloe were going. Jamal was desperate for liquidity. He needed the cash from Vivian's house, and Brenda was going to tear him apart with her bare hands before he could get a single dime. On the quiet, tree-lined street of Beacon Hill, Jamal's black Range Rover jumped the curb, parking aggressively at a harsh angle across the sidewalk in front of my house. Jamal and Chloe burst from the vehicle. Jamal was completely unhinged. He was sweating profusely, his custom-tailored shirt soaked and wrinkled. He barked frantic instructions at Chloe, ordering her to get the locks changed the second they dragged me out, to hire private security to guard the perimeter, and to list the property on the shadow market within the hour. Chloe marched right beside him, clutching her designer handbag tightly against her chest. Inside that bag sat the forged insurance waiver she believed gave her total dominion over my property. Her face was tight with a mixture of arrogant entitlement and mounting infectious panic. They stomped up the stone pathway, ready to execute their hostile, desperate takeover. Before Jamal's foot could even strike the first step of my front porch, the deafening roar of a high-performance engine tore through the peaceful neighborhood. Brenda's Mercedes swung around the corner at a reckless speed, hopping the curb and slamming violently on the brakes. She parked at a sharp diagonal, her front bumper inches from the Range Rover, completely boxing them in. The doors had not even unlocked before Brenda threw herself out of the driver's seat. She looked utterly deranged. Her hair was wild, her expensive clothes disheveled, her eyes wide and manic. She did not say a single word as she charged across the manicured lawn like a heat-seeking missile. Jamal turned around, a flicker of profound confusion crossing his sweating face, just as Brenda swung her heavy brass-studded Chanel tote bag directly into his jaw. The loud, sickening crack of heavy metal striking bone echoed across the quiet street. Jamal stumbled backward, crying out in pain as he clutched his face. Blood instantly began to pool at the corner of his mouth, dripping down his chin and staining his expensive silk collar. "What the hell are you doing?" Jamal yelled, throwing his hands up defensively as Brenda advanced on him again. "You stole my house!" Brenda screamed, her voice tearing from her throat in a ragged, animalistic shriek. "You leveraged my historic estate on the shadow crypto market. You used my home as a shield, you absolute parasite." Jamal's eyes darted frantically, the color completely draining from his face, as he realized his ultimate betrayal had already been discovered. He tried to back away, stammering out a pathetic, poorly constructed lie about temporary liquidity issues and market fluctuations. Brenda did not listen. She lunged forward, grabbing Jamal by the lapels of his shirt and shaking him violently. She screamed that the federal auditors had called her, that her accounts were seized, and that the bank was foreclosing on her estate before the sun went down. Chloe, shocked by the sudden violence, jumped right into the middle of the chaos. She tried to pry her mother's hands off Jamal's ruined shirt, shouting defensively, "Mom, stop it. You are acting crazy. Jamal is fixing everything. We just need to sell Vivian's house and we will get your money back. Brenda turned her blinding fury directly onto her own daughter. She released Jamal and delivered a sharp, resounding slap across Chloe's cheek. The sound cracked like a whip. Chloe gasped, stumbling backward and clutching her face in utter disbelief. The perfectly curated, highly polished illusion of the Sterling family obliterated right there on the grass. It was a vicious, uncoordinated street brawl. Jamal was shouting frantically about federal agents and frozen accounts, demanding Chloe get inside the house immediately to secure the physical asset. Brenda was screaming hysterically, tearing at Jamal's clothes, demanding he reverse the margin call and give her back her generational wealth. Chloe was sobbing, screaming at both of them to stop ruining her designer coat. Neighbors were pulling back their curtains, stepping out onto their porches to witness the wealthy elite family tearing each other apart like street thugs on a Tuesday morning. The pristine, perfectly cut lawn was being shredded by their expensive heels and dress shoes. Then a loud, definitive click cut through the screaming. The heavy brass handle of my mahogany front door turned slowly. The chaotic brawl on the lawn abruptly halted. Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe all froze, panting heavily, their eyes snapping instantly to the porch. They expected to see the victim they had spent weeks engineering. They expected to see the shattered, weeping widow they had broken just yesterday morning. They expected red-rimmed eyes, trembling hands, and a pathetic surrender. Instead, the heavy door swung wide open to reveal a complete and total metamorphosis. I stepped over the threshold and into the morning light. I was not wearing sweatpants or an oversized sweater. I was wearing a razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal power suit. My posture was absolute unyielding iron. My hair was pulled back into a severe, flawless style. In my hands, I held a thick stack of pristine, meticulously tabbed legal folders. I looked down at the bleeding, panting, pathetic mess of my betrayers. I did not shed a tear. I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at them with a slow, calculating smile that was entirely devoid of warmth. The screaming abruptly died in the crisp morning air. Brenda remained frozen on the trampled grass, her chest heaving, a manicured hand hovering near her disheveled hair. Jamal wiped a streak of blood from his split lip, his eyes darting between my tailored charcoal suit and the heavy stack of legal folders resting effortlessly in my grip. The illusion of my fragile, shattered state evaporated instantly, replaced by a suffocating, undeniable authority that anchored me to the porch. For a long moment, the only sound was the harsh, ragged breathing of the people who had conspired to ruin my life. They stared at me as if a ghost had just walked out of the front door. Chloe was the first to break the stunned silence. She desperately needed to reassert the hierarchy she believed she ruled. She pushed past her bleeding husband and her hyperventilating mother, marching up the stone pathway until she stood at the base of my steps. She smoothed the front of her designer coat, lifting her chin to look down her nose at me, desperately trying to salvage her shattered superiority. "Are you delusional, Vivian?" Chloe sneered, her voice trembling slightly despite her attempt at projection. "You can put on a fancy suit and hold all the files you want, but it changes absolutely nothing. You do not own this property anymore. You signed away your rights to the estate, and you signed away David's life insurance. Give me the keys right now, or I will call the police and have you dragged out of my house for trespassing." She reached into her expensive leather handbag with dramatic flair. She pulled out the thick cream-colored document she had snatched from my kitchen counter just yesterday. She waved the paper aggressively in the air, brandishing it like a weapon. She was absolutely certain she held my complete surrender in the palm of her hand. I did not flinch. I did not move toward her. I maintained my position on the top step, my gaze locking onto hers with surgical precision. "Are you absolutely certain about that, Chloe?" I asked, my voice calm, smooth, and echoing clearly across the lawn. "Why do you not take a much closer look at that document before you call the authorities? Read the signature line out loud for us." Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes in exaggerated annoyance. "You are pathetic, Vivian. You are just stalling because you have nowhere else to go." She snapped the document open, preparing to read the ink she had watched me weep over yesterday morning. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. I watched the arrogant smirk melt off her face in real time. Her eyes widened, scanning the top of the page, then the middle, then the bottom. Her hands began to shake violently. She flipped the page over, checking the back. She frantically rubbed her thumb across the thick parchment, desperately searching for the text that was supposed to secure her future. "What is this?" Chloe gasped, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "Where is the ink? Where is your signature?" The heavy cream-colored paper was entirely blank. Every single word of the airtight legal waiver, the predatory clauses, and my tear-stained signature had vanished completely, leaving nothing but empty space. Jamal pushed himself off the grass, stumbling forward to snatch the paper from his wife's trembling hands. He stared at the blank sheet, his bleeding lip parting in total disbelief. He flipped it over, holding it up to the morning sunlight, as if hoping a hidden watermark would magically appear. "Did you really think I would hand over my husband's legacy because you threw a tantrum in my kitchen?" I asked, taking one slow, deliberate step down the porch stairs. My voice was a blade slicing through the morning chill. "Did you honestly believe I was that weak?" "What did you do?" Jamal growled, his knuckles turning white as he crushed the blank paper in his fist. "Thermal disappearing ink, Jamal," I stated flatly. "A minor chemical modification. It degrades completely when exposed to ambient room temperature for more than 12 hours. You watched me sign a binding contract that literally erased itself while you slept. You hold absolutely nothing." Brenda let out a sharp, breathless gasp from the lawn, her hands flying to cover her mouth as the reality of my deception settled over them. She realized instantly that the immediate cash infusion she desperately needed to save her foreclosed mansion was a phantom. But I did not stop there. I raised the pristine legal folder in my left hand. "While you were busy toasting to your brilliance at a luxury steakhouse last night, I was legally securing my assets." I continued, my words hitting them like physical blows. "The $2 million life insurance policy paid out in full at 8 o'clock this morning. I already routed the entire balance directly into an untouchable, highly encrypted blind trust. You cannot access it. You cannot freeze it. You cannot lay a single finger on a dime of David's money." Chloe staggered backward, bumping into the side of the Range Rover. "No," she whimpered, her eyes darting frantically toward Jamal. "Jamal, she is lying. Tell me she is lying. We need that money today. The foreclosure." I turned my gaze directly onto Jamal. He looked as though the ground had opened up beneath his expensive shoes. The pieces were finally clicking together in his panicked, greedy brain. The timing of the financial freeze, the failure of the Cayman Islands transfer, the federal lockdown hitting exactly at midnight. "You," Jamal breathed, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, absolute realization. "You were the auditor. You breached the Vanguard system. You locked my accounts. You orchestrated the murder of my husband for a payout that does not even exist anymore," I replied, my voice dropping to a freezing, absolute register. "And I made absolutely certain that the federal government traced every single fraudulent wire transfer right back to your personal IP address. You are completely bankrupt, Jamal. You have zero liquidity, zero assets, and zero leverage. You are going to federal prison, and you are going to die there." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The crushing reality of his total destruction hit Jamal all at once. He was a man who had controlled everyone and everything around him through intimidation and wealth. Now he was stripped entirely bare, outsmarted and cornered by the woman he had treated as collateral damage. Something primal and vicious snapped inside him. The last remaining shred of his corporate composure vanished entirely. His face twisted into a mask of pure homicidal rage. A guttural, animalistic roar tore from his throat as he lunged forward. He shoved Chloe violently out of the way, sending her crashing onto the concrete driveway. He charged up the stone steps, his boots pounding against the masonry, closing the distance between us. In a single explosive second, Jamal raised his heavy clenched fist, aiming a devastating strike directly at my face. His knuckles were inches from my skin. I did not flinch. I did not even blink. I simply watched the raw, desperate violence in his eyes reach its absolute peak, fully prepared to take the hit. But the blow never landed. A massive, deafening roar of heavy engines shattered the morning air, infinitely louder and more terrifying than Brenda's erratic arrival. The pristine, manicured turf of my front lawn was ripped to shreds as three massive, unmarked black SUVs jumped the curb simultaneously. They swerved violently onto the grass, forming an impenetrable steel barricade around Jamal's Range Rover and Brenda's Mercedes. The heavy vehicles pitched and rocked to a halt, completely boxing in the entire Sterling family. The doors flew open before the tires had even stopped spinning. A dozen heavily armed federal agents poured out their dark tactical gear and body armor, contrasting sharply with the wealthy, peaceful aesthetic of the Beacon Hill neighborhood. Tactical rifles and sidearms were drawn instantly, the laser sights tracking directly toward the porch. Federal agents. Get on the ground right now. Show me your hands. Drop to the ground. The overlapping, booming shouts hit like physical blows. Jamal froze completely, his fist hovering uselessly in the air. The blind, homicidal rage draining from his face was instantly replaced by a paralyzing, primal terror. Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek, scrambling backward until her spine hit the brick facade of the house, sliding down until she was huddled on the porch. Brenda simply collapsed onto her knees in the ruined grass, throwing her hands over her head as if the sky were falling. Do it now. Before Jamal could even twitch to comply, two agents took the stone steps in a single bound. They grabbed him by the shoulders of his ruined, sweat-soaked custom shirt, spinning him around with brutal efficiency. Jamal was launched backward. His chest slammed violently against the hood of his own Range Rover. The heavy metallic thud echoed down the street. The agents wrenched his arms behind his back, the sharp ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists, cutting through the morning air. Wait! Wait, you do not understand! Jamal screamed, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine as his cheek was mashed against the cold metal of the car hood. This is a massive mistake. You have the wrong man. I did not steal anything. The lead agent, a tall man with a severe, uncompromising expression, stepped forward, his hand resting on his tactical belt. Jamal Sterling, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, grand larceny, and the unauthorized transfer of $5 million across international borders. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you start using it. No, listen to me, Jamal begged, thrashing weakly against the crushing grip of the agents pinning him down. It was David. It was David's money. He was the one moving funds into the shadow market. He was bleeding his own clients dry. He set up the Cayman accounts to hide his assets from the firm. I was just trying to fix his mess. I was conducting an internal audit, and I was trying to recover the $5 million he stole before he died. He is the criminal, not me. He orchestrated the entire thing. He was desperately throwing a dead man under the bus. He was frantically attempting to pin his massive, sloppy crypto fraud onto my deceased husband, banking entirely on the fact that dead men cannot testify to defend themselves. Chloe nodded frantically from her spot against the wall, her tears ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark streaks down her pale cheeks. He is telling the truth, Chloe sobbed, pointing a shaking manicured finger at me. David was a thief. Jamal was just trying to protect our family from her husband's illegal activity. She is the one you should be arresting. She is holding all the money in a blind trust. I stood on the top step, observing the pathetic, desperate spectacle playing out on my front lawn. The neighbors had fully stepped out of their houses now, a captivated audience watching the spectacular downfall of the Sterling Empire from their sidewalks and porches. I slowly lowered the pristine legal folders to my side. I reached into the pocket of my tailored suit jacket and extracted my smartphone. I tapped the screen once, waking it up. Then I navigated to the smart home control panel for the high-end outdoor surround sound system David had installed across the exterior of our home last summer. The system utilized hidden high-wattage speakers disguised as landscape features and mounted perfectly beneath the porch awnings. I paired my phone. The Bluetooth connection chimed softly, a clear, crisp tone, signaling it was fully operational. Jamal was still raving, spitting out lie after lie against the hood of the car, desperately trying to weave a narrative where he was the corporate savior, and my dead husband was a master criminal. Agent, I said, my voice cutting through Jamal's frantic shouting with absolute chilling authority. My husband did not steal $5 million. Jamal Sterling embezzled those funds from his own clients and lost it all in an illegal shadow market margin call. But wire fraud is actually the least of his problems today. The lead agent looked at me, signaling his men to hold Jamal firmly. What do you mean, Mrs. Sterling? I mean, you should listen to this, I replied, my eyes locking onto Jamal's terrified face. I pressed play. A short hiss of static crackled across the massive outdoor speakers, immediately followed by crystal clear, digitally enhanced audio. It was loud enough to be heard clearly by the federal agents on the lawn, by Brenda, kneeling in the dirt, by Chloe, cowering against the brick, and by every single neighbor standing on the street. It was Jamal's voice. Arrogant, boastful, and unmistakably clear. I am telling you, Chloe, the timing is flawless. Chloe's recorded voice echoed next, sounding nervous but intensely eager. Are you absolutely sure it cannot be traced back to us? What if the crash investigators look too closely at the vehicle? Jamal's recorded laughter boomed through the neighborhood, a sickening, callous sound that made my blood run cold all over again. Let them look. I paid the mechanic 10 grand in untraceable cash. The brake lines snapped exactly when they were supposed to, exactly how he promised they would. It looks like standard mechanical failure from a neglected leak. David is gone. He is completely out of the way. The firm is ours, the money is ours, and no one will ever suspect a thing. The audio file ended. The deafening silence that rushed in to fill the void was heavier than a physical weight. The color completely vanished from Jamal's face, leaving him looking like a bloodless corpse. His mouth hung open, his eyes dilated in sheer, unadulterated horror. He stopped struggling against the agents. His legs gave out entirely, the only thing keeping him upright being the brutal grip of the federal officers pinning him to the Range Rover. Chloe let out a low, breathless gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as she realized her own voice had just implicated her in a federal murder investigation. Brenda stared at her daughter with wide, horrified eyes, finally understanding the true depths of the monster she had raised. The lead agent stared at me, then slowly turned his gaze back to Jamal. The agent's expression had shifted from professional detachment to absolute hardened disgust. He reached up and tapped his radio shoulder microphone. Dispatch, upgrade the charges, the agent ordered, his voice ringing out in the dead silence of the morning. Add conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree homicide for both Jamal Sterling and Chloe Sterling. I stepped down onto the grass, walking slowly toward the Range Rover, until I was standing inches away from Jamal. He could not even lift his head to look at me. The arrogant prodigy, the untouchable golden boy, was completely and utterly destroyed. You forgot one tiny detail when you plotted to murder my husband in my own house, Jamal, I whispered, leaning in close so only he could hear the final nail in his coffin. I control the security system. I hear absolutely everything. Jamal's fist descended, a desperate, pathetic attempt to claw back his shattered pride through brute force. He never even came close. 2 federal agents hit him simultaneously. They moved with terrifying speed, tackling him sideways before his arm could fully swing. Jamal's feet left the ground entirely. He slammed back against the Range Rover with a concussive thud that rattled the heavy vehicle. His face was forced down hard against the cold, polished steel of the hood. The lead agent pressed his forearm into the back of Jamal's neck, pinning him securely against the metal. He yanked Jamal's arms backward, the sharp, ratcheting sound of steel handcuffs echoing loudly across the lawn as they locked tight around his wrists. Jamal Sterling, the lead agent, barked, his voice carrying absolute authority. You are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford one, one will be provided for you. Furthermore, pursuant to the audio evidence just presented and our ongoing federal wiretap investigation, I am officially adding conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree homicide to your charges. The color completely drained from Chloe's face, leaving her skin an ashen, sickly gray. Brenda stood frozen on the lawn, her mouth hanging open in silent terror. The full weight of the charges finally registered in their panicked minds. First-degree homicide. This was not a financial penalty. This was a life sentence. Chloe broke first. The polished, arrogant facade she had worn like armor her entire life shattered into a million pathetic pieces. She let out a guttural, terrifying wail and threw herself forward. She crawled across the ruined grass and threw her arms around my legs, her manicured hands gripping my ankles with bruising force. "Vivian, please!" Chloe sobbed hysterically, her tears soaking the hem of my tailored trousers. "Please, you have to tell them I had nothing to do with this. I did not know about the breaks. I did not know he was going to kill David. It was all him. And the insurance money, I swear I did not want to take it." She twisted her head around her tear-streaked face, contorting with a desperate, treacherous survival instinct as she pointed a shaking finger directly at her own mother. "Mom made me do it!" Chloe screamed, her voice cracking loudly. "She forced me. She said we were broke and she needed the $2 million to save her estate. She orchestrated the insurance fraud. She is the one who wanted David's money. Arrest her! Arrest my mother!" Brenda's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated shock. The ultimate betrayal coming from her own flesh and blood severed the last frayed thread of her sanity. With a vicious, animalistic shriek, Brenda lunged forward. She swung her arm with brutal momentum, striking Chloe across the face with a sickening smack that silenced her screaming instantly. "Shut your treacherous mouth!" Brenda roared, her face twisted into a mask of absolute hatred. "I gave you everything, you spoiled, useless brat!" Two federal agents immediately swarmed Brenda, grabbing her arms and forcing her roughly to the ground. She thrashed and spat, screaming curses at Chloe, while the agents secured handcuffs around her wrists. Chloe lay curled on the grass, sobbing uncontrollably, clutching her stinging cheek as her husband and mother were locked into federal restraints right in front of her. I did not move. I did not flinch. I looked down at the pathetic weeping woman clinging to my shoes. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal jacket. My fingers brushed against a crisp piece of paper I had kept specifically for this exact moment. I pulled it out. It was a single, flawless $100 bill. The exact same bill Brenda had thrown at me across a restaurant table when she thought I was nothing more than a defeated, penniless widow. I flicked my wrist. The crisp bill fluttered through the cool morning air, landing gently directly onto Chloe's lap. "Buy some groceries," I said, my voice cold, calm, and utterly devoid of mercy. "Stop embarrassing me." Chloe stared at the money, a fresh wave of humiliated sobs tearing through her chest. The federal agents hauled Jamal and Brenda to their feet, dragging them toward the waiting black SUVs. Neighbors watched in stunned, captivated silence as the wealthy elite Sterling family was systematically dismantled and shoved into the back of armored government vehicles. As the agents began reading Chloe, her own Miranda rights, a low, powerful hum vibrated down the street. A sleek, midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided smoothly around the corner. It moved with an undeniable heavy elegance, pulling to a silent stop directly behind the barricade of federal vehicles. The sheer presence of the car commanded the immediate attention of everyone on the lawn. The heavy rear door swung open. Marcus Sterling stepped out onto the pavement. He was impeccably dressed in a bespoke navy suit, his silver hair perfectly styled, his posture radiating absolute, unchallenged power. This was the true patriarch of the Sterling Empire, the man Jamal had spent his entire life desperately trying to impress and overthrow. Marcus did not even glance at Jamal. He ignored Brenda's frantic, pleading shouts from the back of the SUV. He completely dismissed Chloe as she was hauled to her feet by a female agent. He walked with measured, deliberate steps straight up my front walkway, stopping precisely at the base of my porch. He looked at the chaotic scene, looked at the federal agents securing his treacherous relatives, and then he looked up at me. A slow, genuine smile spread across his weathered face. He reached out, extending his hand toward me. I stepped down and met his grip with a firm, unwavering handshake. Flawlessly executed. Vivian Marcus declared, his deep voice carrying clearly over the chaos, ensuring every agent, every neighbor, and every doomed member of his family heard him perfectly. It is an absolute honor to officially welcome you aboard as the new head of global auditing for Sterling International. We have a lot of corrupt books to clean up, and you are exactly the apex predator I need. 3 days later, the sterile glass-walled boardroom at Vanguard Horizon sat suspended 50 floors above the Boston skyline. The atmosphere inside the room was freezing, strictly clinical, and completely devoid of oxygen. The sweeping panoramic views of the city offered absolutely no comfort to the man chained to the heavy mahogany table. Jamal wore a bright orange federal prison jumpsuit, a stark, humiliating contrast to the bespoke Italian suits he had draped himself in just 72 hours ago. Heavy steel cuffs linked his wrists to a thick metal security bolt anchored directly into the wood. Beside him sat his high-priced defense attorney, a balding, nervous man named Harrison, who was currently sweating profusely and aggressively wiping his forehead with a crumpled silk handkerchief. The silence in the room was heavy and suffocating. Despite the glaring orange jumpsuit and the restrictive steel chains, Jamal still clung to a pathetic, delusional arrogance. He leaned back in his leather executive chair, as far as the heavy chains would allow, a familiar, arrogant smirk playing on his bruised and split lip. He genuinely believed he still held the winning hand in this high-stakes game. He had spent the last 3 days sitting in a concrete federal holding cell, meticulously calculating his leverage and planning his ultimate exit strategy. He knew exactly how the justice system worked for wealthy men. He fully planned to offer the federal prosecutors a highly lucrative list of offshore shell companies and elite international money laundering contacts in exchange for a drastically reduced sentence. 5 years in a minimum security white-collar resort facility. That was his absolute maximum acceptable penalty. He would serve his easy time network with other disgraced corporate executives on the tennis courts and emerge ready to rebuild his shadow empire. The heavy glass doors of the boardroom slid open with a sharp pneumatic hiss. Jamal shifted his gaze lazily, fully expecting the lead federal prosecutor to walk through the threshold with a generous plea agreement ready for his immediate signature. Instead, Marcus Sterling strode into the room, radiating unyielding, terrifying authority. Right beside him, matching his measured, predatory pace, step for step, was me. I wore a pristine, custom-tailored white suit that stood out sharply against the dark, oppressive corporate interior. I carried a massive, thick leather briefcase. Marcus walked toward the end of the table and gestured silently to the head chair. I did not hesitate for a single second. I pulled back the heavy executive chair and sat down, claiming absolute dominion over the room and the men sitting across from me. Marcus took the seat immediately to my right, folding his hands and watching the spectacle unfold with cold satisfaction. "What kind of joke is this?" Jamal scoffed, his smirk faltering slightly as his eyes darted frantically between Marcus and me. "Where is the federal prosecutor? I am not negotiating my criminal plea deal with my disgraced father-in-law and a vindictive widow. Call the prosecutor right now, Harrison. Tell them I am ready to hand over the Cayman Island contacts for a guaranteed 5-year maximum sentence, or I walk away from the table entirely. They need what I have." Harrison opened his mouth to speak, his hands shaking slightly, but I raised a single finger, silencing the sweating attorney instantly. "You are fundamentally misunderstanding your current position, Jamal," I stated, my voice echoing coldly and sharply off the glass walls. "There is no federal prosecutor coming through that door to save you. There is absolutely no negotiation happening at this table today, and you have absolutely nothing of value left to offer anyone in this building." I unlatched my leather briefcase with 2 loud, decisive clicks. I reached inside and withdrew a massive, heavily bound document. It was a 500-page, meticulously detailed, flawlessly constructed forensic audit bound in thick black leather. Every single page represented a nail in his coffin. I lifted the heavy stack of paper and dropped it directly onto the center of the polished mahogany table. The impact sounded exactly like a gunshot, echoing in the enclosed space. I compiled this comprehensive audit over the last 72 hours. I continued leaning forward and locking my eyes onto his terrified face. I did not just track down the $5 million you stole from David. That was complete child's play. That was simply the loose thread I needed to pull to unravel the entirety of your fraudulent existence. I went much deeper. I bypassed your pathetic proxy servers, I cracked your encrypted shadow ledgers, and I aggressively traced every single financial transaction you have executed since you manipulated your way into Vanguard Horizon. Jamal stared at the massive paper audit, a single bead of cold sweat rolling down his temple. His arrogant smirk completely vanished, replaced by a mask of dawning absolute horror. He pulled instinctively against his steel handcuffs, the chains rattling loudly against the heavy table. The sharp clinking of his steel restraints echoed in the quiet room as his hands began to tremble violently. The realization of his total destruction was absolute. You did not just embezzle from your own elite clients to fund a volatile crypto margin loan, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous freezing register that left no room for debate. You have been running a secondary, massive, highly illegal Ponzi scheme through Vanguard Horizon for an entire decade. You created fictitious hedge funds, you falsified quarterly returns, and you used new investor capital to pay off early stakeholders while systematically skimming tens of millions of dollars into untraceable offshore accounts. You defrauded hundreds of clients, Jamal. You stole directly from federal pension funds. Harrison stopped wiping his forehead. He dropped his silk handkerchief onto the floor. He stared at his client in absolute paralyzing terror, fully realizing the catastrophic magnitude of the crimes he was now sitting adjacent to. Jamal opened his mouth to defend himself, to spin another desperate lie, but his voice completely failed him. He gasped for air, his chest heaving as the walls of the glass boardroom seemed to close in around him rapidly. The federal prosecutor already has a verified digital copy of this entire audit, I stated smoothly, leaning back in my leather chair and folding my hands. They do not need your offshore contacts to build their case, Jamal, because I already gave them the account numbers, the routing codes, and the proxy identities. Your proposed 5-year plea deal is gone. It does not exist. Given the new evidence I just submitted to the director, the Department of Justice is upgrading your charges across the board. You are not going to a minimum security resort. You are facing a mandatory, non-negotiable sentence of life in federal prison. Jamal's breath hitched violently in his throat. He stared at the thick black leather binder sitting in the center of the table as if it were a live, ticking explosive. His chest rose and fell in rapid, erratic jerks. The illusion of his elite corporate armor had completely evaporated, leaving behind a terrified, cornered animal. I did not give him a single second to recover his breath or formulate a new lie. I reached forward and flipped open the heavy cover of the audit. Page 1. Jamal, I said, my voice slicing through the sterile silence of the room. Let us discuss the immediate financial restitution. The federal government does not simply lock you in a cage and walk away. They are legally mandated to make your victims whole. And they are going to achieve that by stripping your life down to the absolute bare studs. Every single offshore account you thought was brilliantly shielded behind dummy corporations in the Caymans, the Seychelles, and Switzerland has already been frozen. The Vanguard Horizon Board of Directors authorized a total asset seizure at 7 o'clock this morning. We are legally recouping the stolen pension funds by liquidating your entire portfolio. Your unvested stock options, your commercial real estate holdings, your hidden crypto wallets. Everything is completely gone. You possess zero liquidity. Jamal opened his mouth, a dry, rasping sound escaping his cracked, bruised lips. But my money. He choked out, his eyes darting frantically. You cannot just seize private assets without a civil trial. I have rights. It was never your money, I countered, staring him down with surgical precision. It was stolen capital, and the recovery process extends far beyond your personal banking accounts. I slid a sleek manila folder across the polished mahogany. It glided smoothly, coming to a stop right against his shackled wrists. Open it, Harrison, I commanded, not shifting my gaze from Jamal. Harrison, his hands visibly trembling, reached out and opened the folder. He reviewed the top sheets, his face turning an alarming, sickly shade of pale as his eyes scanned the official letterhead. "These are federal asset forfeiture warrants," I stated smoothly, leaning back in my chair. "Signed by a federal judge less than an hour ago. At this exact moment, United States Marshals are standing inside your primary residence. They are officially confiscating Chloe's Range Rover from the driveway. They are cataloging and seizing her diamond rings, her Cartier watches, and her entire collection of imported Birkin bags. The designer wardrobe she treasures more than human life is currently being shoved into cardboard evidence boxes. Your bank accounts are drained, and your wife is being stripped of the fraudulent lifestyle you built for her." Jamal lunged forward, the heavy steel chains snapping taut against the table with a violent crash. "Leave Chloe out of this!" he roared, his voice cracking with desperate panic. "She did not know about the hedge funds. She does not understand the corporate accounts. She is an accessory to a $5 million insurance fraud and a willing conspirator in a murder plot." "Jamal," I replied, my tone dropping to a freezing, absolute calm. "She will be extraordinarily lucky to keep the clothes on her back when the Department of Justice is finished with her. But the absolute best part of this aggressive asset retrieval strategy involves your mother-in-law." I turned a page in the audit, the crisp paper cutting through the heavy air. "Brenda thought she was being incredibly clever when she helped you secure those massive fraudulent commercial loans 3 years ago." I continued, detailing his destruction piece by piece. "She knowingly signed sworn character witness documents and falsely inflated her own asset declarations to help you pass the federal underwriting scrutiny. She lied on federal banking documents to facilitate your Ponzi scheme. That makes her legally and financially culpable. She guaranteed your fraudulent debt with her own estate. The federal government is officially foreclosing on her mansion today. Brenda is completely liquidated. She has zero equity, zero property, and zero cash. She will be standing on the curb with a trash bag of her belongings by sunset." The room fell dead silent again, save for the frantic, ragged breathing of the ruined man chained to the table. Marcus Sterling sat quietly beside me, a look of profound, terrifying satisfaction etched across his features as he watched the systematic dismantling of his treacherous son-in-law. Harrison, the high-priced defense attorney, finally moved. He picked up the massive forensic audit. He flipped past the executive summary and began reading the raw data. He looked at the meticulously tracked bank routing numbers, the exposed IP addresses, the signed fraudulent affidavits, and the incontrovertible digital footprints mapping out a decade of staggering financial crimes. The lawyer's sweating, anxious face hardened into a mask of cold professional survival. He realized instantly that this was not a defensible case. It was a professional suicide mission. There were no loopholes, no legal gray areas, and no procedural errors to exploit. The paper trail was absolute, flawless, and devastating. Harrison slowly closed the thick black binder. He meticulously stacked his own legal pads, aligning the edges perfectly. He placed his gold fountain pen into his breast pocket and reached for his expensive leather briefcase. He dropped his files inside and snapped the brass locks shut. The sharp clicks echoed like a judge's gavel, finalizing a sentence. Jamal looked up at him, wild, unadulterated panic flashing in his bloodshot eyes. "Harrison, what are you doing?" Jamal demanded, pulling against his chains. "Tell them this is a violation of my due process. File a federal injunction. Call the judge right now." Harrison stood up, pushing his chair in. He looked down at his client with absolute, unfiltered, professional disgust. "You told me this was a simple misunderstanding over an aggressive margin call," Jamal Harrison said, his voice completely devoid of sympathy or warmth. "You looked me in the eye and lied to me. You deliberately hid a decade-long federal Ponzi scheme and an active murder conspiracy. You are a radioactive liability, and this case is completely unwinnable. My firm does not represent clients who intentionally conceal federal crimes of this magnitude during intake." Harrison picked up his briefcase, adjusted his expensive silk tie, and looked Jamal dead in the eye. "You are officially on your own." Harrison turned on his heel and walked straight out of the glass boardroom. The heavy doors hissed shut behind him, sealing the room. Jamal Sterling sat entirely defenseless, chained to the heavy mahogany table, utterly abandoned and completely destroyed. The heavy glass doors hissed shut behind Harrison, sealing the boardroom in a vacuum of absolute suffocating silence. Jamal stared at the empty space where his high-priced salvation had just evaporated. The crushing reality of his total isolation finally fractured his mind. He snapped. He strained violently against the thick steel cuffs, the heavy chains biting deep into his wrists, as he lunged across the mahogany table toward me. His handsome face contorted into an ugly, desperate mask of pure venom. He spat vicious insults, his voice echoing sharply off the sterile glass walls. "You think you won?" Jamal screamed, his chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths. "You are nothing. You are a pathetic, grieving widow who just got lucky. You did not beat me. Marcus handed you this victory on a silver platter because he wanted me out of the company. You are just a useful idiot in his corporate game. You possess absolutely no power of your own." Marcus Sterling sat perfectly still to my right, a cold, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. He did not say a single word to defend me. He knew he did not need to. I pushed my heavy leather executive chair back and stood up slowly. The sharp click of my heels against the polished hardwood floor was the only sound cutting through Jamal's pathetic ranting. I walked deliberately around the massive table, closing the distance until I stood directly over him. He was forced to crane his neck upward, chained like a rabid dog to the furniture, his chest heaving with terrified exertion. I reached into the deep pocket of my tailored white suit jacket. My fingers closed around a heavy, cold piece of metal. I pulled my hand out and threw the object forcefully onto the pristine glass surface of the table, right between Jamal's shackled wrists. The heavy gold and silver links clattered sharply, sliding across the slick surface. It was David's Rolex. It was the exact custom timepiece Brenda had stripped from our house the morning after his funeral, the one she had proudly flaunted on her wrist before pawning it to fund her grotesque, fraudulent lifestyle. I had federal marshals execute a seizure order at the pawnshop yesterday afternoon, using the serial number from my insurance records. I watched Jamal's eyes drop to the watch, the last remaining symbol of his family's arrogant theft, returned to its rightful owner. "Marcus did not hand me anything." I stated, my voice a freezing, razor-thin whisper that forced Jamal to hold his breath just to hear it. "I built the entire guillotine. I simply handed Marcus the rope to pull." I leaned in close, resting my palms on the table, invading his space completely. "You genuinely believed you were a financial mastermind because you used a basic virtual private network and routed your stolen funds through a shell corporation in the Seychelles." I continued, my tone dripping with absolute intellectual contempt. "You left a digital footprint wider than a commercial runway, Jamal. You used the exact same sequence of alphanumeric passwords for your encrypted Cayman crypto wallets as you did for your Vanguard Horizon administrative login. It took me less than 12 minutes to crack your primary firewall." Jamal's pupils dilated. The last trace of color drained from his face as I casually recited the exact IP addresses of his illegal offshore servers. "You logged into your shadow market accounts from your home wireless network," I said, watching his breathing turn shallow and panicked. "You transferred stolen pension funds while sitting in your own living room, linking your personal computer's MAC address directly to the embezzled capital. You were so blinded by your own arrogance and greed that you failed to cover your most basic operational tracks. I did not just find the missing $5 million. I engineered a customized tracking algorithm that monitored every single keystroke you made for the last 6 months. I watched you steal. I watched you panic. I watched you pay a mechanic $10,000 in cash for my husband's murder. I dug your grave, and I watched you gladly jump inside." He was trembling violently now, the steel chains rattling uncontrollably against the heavy wood. The arrogant corporate predator was completely dead, replaced by a broken, terrified boy facing the end of his life. "You are going to a maximum security federal penitentiary," I whispered, delivering the final, inescapable verdict. "You will spend the rest of your natural life in an 8 by 10 concrete box. You will never wear a custom suit again. You will never eat in a five-star restaurant again. You will never see the sky without barbed wire blocking your view. You are nothing but a footnote in my husband's legacy. I turned my back on him and nodded to the two armed federal marshals standing guard inside the boardroom doors. They stepped forward instantly, unlocking the heavy security bolt anchoring Jamal to the table. They hauled him roughly to his feet. The physical reality of his life sentence crashed down on him with absolute finality. Jamal began to sob. Deep, ugly, gasping wails tore from his throat as the guards dragged him toward the exit. His legs gave out his bright orange jumpsuit, slipping off his shoulder as he was pulled through the glass doors. He wept hysterically, begging for a deal that no longer existed. His cries fading down the carpeted hallway as he was escorted out of the corporate world forever. I smoothed the front of my white suit jacket, picked up my heavy leather briefcase, and turned toward the exit. Marcus Sterling remained inside the boardroom, already dialing his board of directors to announce the complete eradication of his treacherous son-in-law. I walked down the quiet hallway and stepped into the main executive elevators. I rode the car down 50 floors, feeling a profound, absolute sense of closure settling into my bones. The elevator chimed, and the polished steel doors slid open, revealing the massive marble-floored lobby of Vanguard Horizon. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the bustling corporate environment. I stepped out of the elevator, ready to walk out into the crisp air and reclaim my life. But a sudden chaotic movement near the main security desk caught my eye. A woman was standing there, arguing frantically with two uniformed guards who were actively trying to block her path. Her designer clothes were rumpled, stained, and completely disheveled. Her expensive hair was a chaotic, unbrushed mess. She clutched a cheap, stuffed plastic shopping bag to her chest like a shield, her face pale and drawn. It was Brenda. She had been formally evicted from her foreclosed mansion hours ago. Stripped of her fraudulent assets, her bank accounts frozen, and her daughter facing federal murder charges, she looked completely unhinged, wild-eyed, and entirely homeless. She turned her head, her desperate, frantic gaze locking directly onto me as I stood in the center of the pristine lobby. Brenda dropped her plastic shopping bag. It hit the marble floor with a pathetic hollow thud, spilling a tangled mess of cheap cosmetics, crumpled receipts, and loose change. She sprinted across the expansive lobby, her sensible shoes slapping loudly and frantically against the polished stone. Before I could even brace myself, she threw herself at me, her clawed hands locking onto the pristine sleeve of my white suit. Her grip was bruising, desperate, and entirely unwelcome. Her breath smelled of stale coffee and pure, unadulterated panic. "Vivian!" She gasped, her voice a ragged, hysterical wheeze that echoed off the high ceilings. "Vivian! Thank God! You have to help me. You have to stop them right now." Men in federal windbreakers just kicked me out of my own home. They changed the locks while I was standing on the porch. They froze my checking accounts. I went to buy a cup of coffee and my card was declined. I have absolutely nothing left. You have to write me a check right now, just a small loan, $100,000. Something to keep me off the streets until this massive misunderstanding is cleared up. I stared at her, completely motionless. She shook my arm, her eyes wide with manufactured terror, deploying the ultimate weapon she had utilized for my entire life. "I raised you, Vivian," she wailed, drawing the stares of corporate executives passing through the lobby. "I gave you a roof over your head. I put clothes on your back. We are blood. You cannot just stand there and watch your own mother become homeless. You owe me this. You owe your family some loyalty." Jamal made a mistake, but we are innocent victims in all of this. I looked down at her, hands gripping my sleeve. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I simply reached over and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one with the clinical, unfeeling detachment of someone removing a blood-sucking leech. I let her hands drop uselessly to her sides and stepped back, creating an impenetrable wall of ice between us. "I owe you absolutely nothing," I stated, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity across the quiet marble floor. The word family implies a bond built on fundamental trust and mutual protection. You destroyed any claim to that word exactly 14 years ago. Do you remember what happened the summer I turned 18, Brenda? because I remember every single detail with flawless photographic clarity. Brenda blinked, her frantic sobbing stalling as confusion washed over her face. She tried to reach for me again, but my freezing glare pinned her feet to the floor. I had worked 3 miserable, back-breaking jobs during high school. I continued stepping closer and forcing her to meet my eyes. I scrubbed floors in diners, I washed dishes until my hands bled, and I systematically saved $22,000 to pay for my freshman year of college. I kept it in a joint savings account because I was a minor and I foolishly trusted my own mother to protect my future. And then August arrived. I went to the bank to withdraw my tuition money, and the teller told me the balance was zero. Brenda swallowed hard, the blood rushing completely out of her cheeks. She knew exactly what I was about to say. Her eyes darted toward the exit, searching for an escape route that did not exist. "You drained my entire college fund," I said, my words dropping like heavy anvils in the quiet lobby. "You stole $22,000 of my hard-earned money so you could throw Chloe an extravagant, lavish Sweet 16 party at the country club. You bought her a brand new convertible car, hired a professional event planner, and commissioned a ridiculous ice sculpture, all while I was forced to drop out of my dream university and take out predatory loans just to survive. You looked me in the eye back then and told me Chloe needed the social exposure more than I needed an education. You told me I was strong enough to figure it out on my own." I paused, letting the crushing weight of her historical betrayal suffocate her. "Well, I figured it out," I said smoothly. "You did not make a mistake, Brenda. You made a highly calculated investment in your golden child. You enabled Chloe's toxic vanity, and you funded Jamal's catastrophic greed. You gladly signed those fraudulent federal loan documents because you wanted the prestige of a wealthy son-in-law. Your own toxic narcissism and your blind, pathetic favoritism dug this exact grave. You built a criminal house of cards, and now it has collapsed directly on top of you. I am not writing you a check. I am not offering you a lifeline. I am formally and legally severing every single tie that binds us. I do not have a mother, and you no longer have a safety net." Before Brenda could formulate a pathetic response, the heavy revolving doors of the Vanguard Horizon lobby spun open violently. A blast of damp, freezing wind swept into the building, bringing with it a drenched, hysterical figure. It was Chloe. She was completely unrecognizable. Her expensive designer makeup was smeared down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks. She wore a stained, ripped cashmere sweater and clutched a single crushed Louis Vuitton handbag to her chest. The federal marshals had clearly been less than gentle when they dragged her out of the multi-million-dollar estate. She looked frantic, cornered, and highly volatile. Chloe stumbled into the lobby, her eyes darting wildly until they locked onto Brenda. But she did not run to her mother for comfort. She did not even look at me. She marched straight up to Brenda, her face contorted in a mask of pure, vicious rage. "This is your fault," Chloe screamed, her voice cracking shrilly as she shoved her mother hard in the chest. "You told me Jamal was a genius. You told me signing those proxy documents was just a standard tax strategy for wealthy people. You introduced him to those shady offshore bankers at the country club. You promised me I would be a billionaire's wife." Brenda stumbled backward, shocked by the physical assault. "Chloe, stop it," she pleaded, raising her hands defensively. "We have to stick together. Your sister is being cruel. She will not help us." My sister Chloe shrieked, taking another aggressive step forward, her eyes wide and manic. "You ruined my life. The federal agents literally pulled my engagement ring off my finger. They impounded my cars. They told me I am facing federal conspiracy and wire fraud charges because of the corporate paperwork you made me sign. You set me up to take the fall for your Ponzi scheme. You knew he was stealing money." The screaming match escalated instantly into a violent physical brawl. Chloe dropped her crushed handbag and lunged at Brenda, grabbing handfuls of her mother's salon-styled hair. Brenda shrieked, slapping and clawing wildly at Chloe's face. The two women, stripped of their stolen wealth and their superficial dignity, tore into each other like feral animals right in the middle of the corporate lobby. They knocked over a heavy brass stanchion, their screams echoing off the marble walls as they tumbled to the floor in a tangled mess of thrashing limbs and torn designer fabric. Two massive Vanguard Horizon security guards sprinted across the marble floor. They did not hesitate or offer any warnings. They grabbed Chloe and Brenda by their arms, hauling them apart roughly. The women continued to kick and spit at each other, screaming vicious, unforgivable insults as the guards dragged them backward toward the exit. I stood perfectly still, my hands resting comfortably in my pockets. I watched with absolute detachment as the security team shoved my mother and my sister aggressively through the revolving doors. They were tossed violently out onto the cold concrete pavement just as the sky ripped open above the city. A torrential, freezing rain began to pour down on them instantly. They scrambled in the deep puddles, pushing each other into the wet street, fighting over a ruined purse, utterly ruined and completely alone. I turned my back on the pathetic scene, adjusted my briefcase, and walked out into the storm, stepping into a future that belonged entirely to me. I walked out into the freezing downpour, but the icy rain hitting my face felt entirely like a baptism. I climbed into the driver's seat of my car, the heavy leather door shutting out the chaotic, pathetic screams of the two women tearing each other to pieces on the wet concrete. I started the engine, the low hum of the motor a soothing contrast to the madness I had just orchestrated and executed. The drive back to the suburbs was slow, methodical, and profoundly peaceful. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers cleared the heavy rain, washing away the last lingering shadows of Jamal, Brenda, and Chloe. I watched the city skyline fade in the rearview mirror, leaving Vanguard Horizon and the smoking crater of their shattered lives far behind me. For the first time in nearly a year, my chest did not feel tight with anxiety or burning with the need for retribution. The relentless, exhausting fire that had kept me awake for hundreds of consecutive nights had finally been extinguished. I turned onto my quiet, tree-lined street, the familiar glow of the street lamps cutting through the evening storm. I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine. I sat in the quiet cabin of the car for a long moment, simply staring at the beautiful, sprawling house standing resolute against the weather. This was my sanctuary. It was entirely mine. The crushing mortgage that Jamal had manipulated, the fraudulent liens Brenda had attempted to weaponize, the constant suffocating threat of foreclosure they had dangled over my head like a guillotine, it was all completely gone. The property was fully legally paid off. The title was secured in an ironclad trust, shielded behind layers of federal protection that no greedy relative or corrupt executive could ever pierce. I walked up the front steps, unlocked the heavy oak door, and stepped inside. The security system beeped a quiet, reassuring acknowledgement of my arrival. I punched in my private code, sealing the house tight against the outside world. The silence inside was not heavy or oppressive. It was a warm, golden silence. It was the sound of absolute, untouchable safety. I kicked off my damp shoes and walked barefoot across the polished hardwood floor, my gaze drifting naturally toward the main living room. The space was immaculate, perfectly restored to the exact condition David and I had always kept it. The dark mahogany furniture gleamed, and the soft amber light from the table lamps cast long, peaceful shadows across the room. But as I stood in the center of the room, my eyes locked onto a single, glaring imperfection on the far wall. It was a large, silver-framed photograph of David and me on our wedding day. We were laughing on a beach, the wind catching my veil, his strong arms wrapped securely around my waist. The frame was hanging slightly crooked. It had been tilted exactly like that since the morning Brenda and Chloe had invaded my home, like scavenging vultures, tearing through my personal belongings and looting my husband's valuables while his body was barely cold. In their frantic, greedy rush to steal everything, not bolted down, one of them had knocked into the wall, knocking the picture out of alignment. I had refused to fix it. I had deliberately left it hanging off-center for months as a daily visual reminder of their treachery. It was the jagged edge that kept my rage razor-sharp, the visual cue that fueled my meticulous, calculated revenge. But tonight, that rage was no longer necessary. The fuel had been entirely consumed. I walked slowly across the room, stopping directly in front of the photograph. I reached out my fingertips, brushing the cool silver edge of the frame. With one gentle, deliberate motion, I adjusted the picture. It slid perfectly into place, aligning flawlessly against the patterned wallpaper. The symmetry was completely restored. I rested my hand flat against the glass right over David's smiling face. The glass felt cool beneath my palm. "We did it," I whispered into the quiet, empty room, my voice steady and completely clear. "Your name is entirely cleared. Your legacy is protected and secure. The parasites who tried to erase you have been completely eradicated. They are rotting in federal holding cells stripped of their stolen money, their unearned dignity, and their freedom. I finished the fight, David. You can finally rest." You. I dropped my hand, taking one last look at the perfectly straight frame, feeling a profound, sweeping sense of finality wash over me. I turned toward the large television mounted above the fireplace mantel. I picked up the sleek black remote from the coffee table and clicked the power button. The screen flared to life, immediately tuning into the primary evening news broadcast. The serious, grim face of the lead anchor filled the screen, framed by a glaring, flashing red graphic that read, "Vanguard Horizon Federal Raid." The anchor looked directly into the camera, her tone dripping with intense journalistic urgency. "Good evening," she announced, her voice filling my quiet living room. "We begin tonight with massive breaking news out of the financial district. A highly coordinated multi-agency federal raid was executed this afternoon at the corporate headquarters of Vanguard Horizon. Federal prosecutors have unsealed a sweeping 500-page indictment detailing a staggering decade-long Ponzi scheme that defrauded investors of tens of millions of dollars. The secondary charges include severe allegations of insurance fraud, embezzlement from federal pension funds, and a suspected conspiracy to commit murder for hire." The broadcast cut to aerial helicopter footage showing dozens of armed federal agents swarming the glass skyscraper I had just exited hours ago. The mastermind behind the massive financial fraud, high-ranking executive Jamal Sterling, was taken into federal custody earlier today. The anchor continued seamlessly as the footage shifted to a frantic scene outside the building. Sources inside the Department of Justice confirm that Sterling was denied bail and is currently facing a mandatory sentence of life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. In a highly unprecedented move, authorities have also executed total asset seizures against his known co-conspirators and immediate family members, resulting in the immediate and total financial ruin of several prominent local figures who knowingly benefited from the stolen funds. The camera cut back to the anchor at her desk. The swiftness of the asset forfeiture has left multiple individuals completely destitute within hours of the warrants being signed. The sheer scale of the deception has rocked the financial sector, but federal agents credit an anonymous, flawlessly compiled forensic audit that was delivered directly to the director's desk for blowing the case wide open. Justice, it seems, has been swiftly, aggressively, and completely served. I turned off the television, letting the screen fade to a quiet, peaceful black. The dark, silent glass of the television screen perfectly mirrored the quiet stillness of my living room. I sat on the couch for a long time, listening to the absolute silence of a house that was finally permanently mine. When the first faint traces of gray dawn began to bleed through the heavy curtains, I stood up and walked into the kitchen. The storm from the previous night had completely passed, leaving behind a world that felt fundamentally scrubbed clean. I moved through the kitchen with a slow, deliberate grace, savoring the simple, mundane ritual of brewing coffee. I ground the dark roast beans, the rich, bitter aroma filling the pristine space. I poured the steaming black liquid into a heavy ceramic mug. I did not feel the familiar suffocating crush of anxiety that had defined my mornings for the past year. There was no dread gnawing at the lining of my stomach. There was no hyper-vigilant paranoia warning me to check my bank balances or verify my digital firewalls. The relentless, exhausting war was over. I unlocked the French doors and stepped out onto the expansive back porch. The morning air was razor-sharp and freezing, biting pleasantly against my cheeks. I leaned against the heavy wooden railing and wrapped both hands around the hot ceramic mug, letting the warmth seep into my palms. Slowly, the sun began to crest over the distant tree line. It cut through the lingering morning mist, casting long, brilliant streaks of gold and violent orange across the manicured lawn. I watched the light slowly eradicate the shadows, feeling a profound physical transformation taking place within my own body. For 12 agonizing months, I had worn the pathetic, fragile mask of a broken widow. I had allowed Brenda to patronize me. I had allowed Chloe to disrespect me. I had allowed Jamal to look down on me with unearned, arrogant pity. I had weaponized their extreme narcissism against them, using their blind underestimation of my intellect as the perfect camouflage to construct their total destruction. But standing here in the cold morning light, I realized that the mask was permanently gone. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the collateral damage of a greedy sociopath. I had forged myself into a weapon of absolute precision, and I was in complete unyielding control of my own destiny. The shrill, jarring ring of my encrypted mobile phone shattered the morning peace. I did not flinch. I did not rush. I took another slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee, savoring the bitter taste on my tongue. I reached into the pocket of my slacks, retrieved the heavy black device, and glanced at the secure caller identification screen. It was Marcus Sterling. I pressed the green icon and lifted the phone to my ear. Vivian Marcus, said his gravelly voice, cutting through the secure connection with professional urgency. The Department of Justice officially froze the last of Jamal's secondary proxy accounts at 4 o'clock this morning. They seized the offshore crypto wallets and successfully routed the remaining capital back into the Vanguard Horizon Recovery Fund. The liquidation of Brenda and Chloe's assets was completed an hour ago. They are officially bankrupt. The board of directors is completely satisfied. You executed a flawless extraction. I know, Marcus, I replied, my voice steady and entirely devoid of emotion. I designed the extraction protocols to be absolute. They have exactly nothing left. There was a brief, rare pause on the other end of the line. Marcus Sterling was a man who measured his words like currency, never wasting a single syllable. When he finally spoke again, the dynamic of our relationship had clearly shifted from a temporary alliance of convenience to a partnership of mutual high-level respect. Your architectural understanding of forensic data is unprecedented, Vivian Marcus stated bluntly. The board did not just review your findings regarding Jamal, they reviewed your methodology. They reviewed the aggressive digital algorithms you built to bypass his firewalls. You did not just find the missing money. You completely reinvented how we track shadow capital. You are currently the most dangerous forensic accountant on the eastern seaboard. I kept my gaze fixed on the rising sun. Tell me why you are calling me at 6 in the morning on a private line, Marcus. I just received a secure communication from the executive board of a massive multinational shipping conglomerate based out of London. Marcus continued, his tone shifting into pure predatory business. They are bleeding capital at a catastrophic rate. They have identified ghost ships on their ledgers, phantom cargo manifests, and millions of pounds being systematically siphoned through a labyrinth of shell companies in Cyprus and Malta. Their internal auditors are completely blind. They know they have a massive corruption ring operating at the highest executive levels of their company, but they cannot prove it. They need a ghost. They need an apex predator who can quietly dismantle a billionaire syndicate without leaving a single fingerprint. Marcus took a slow breath. They heard the rumors about what happened at Vanguard Horizon yesterday, Marcus said softly. They heard about the widow who burned a financial empire to the ground from her laptop. They specifically requested you, Vivian. They want Vanguard's top forensic accountant on a transatlantic flight by Monday morning to rip their company down to the studs and find the thieves. The wind picked up, rustling the heavy branches of the oak trees lining my property. The cold air rushed over me, but I did not feel the chill. I felt alive. I felt dangerous. It is a massive, highly volatile operation, Marcus added, his voice dropping an octave, revealing a sliver of genuine, uncharacteristic human concern. I know you just closed the book on David's murder. I know the trial is looming. You have been running on pure adrenaline and vengeance for a year. If you need a month to decompress, if you need more time to grieve your husband properly, I can tell the London board to wait. I can buy you the time. I lowered the coffee mug. I looked out at the brilliant burning sun fully breaking over the horizon, bathing my house, my sanctuary, and my future in blinding golden light. David was at peace. His name was spotless, his legacy was secured, and the monsters who took him from me were locked in concrete cages for the rest of their natural lives. I had honored his memory by surviving, but now it was time to conquer. I had discovered exactly what I was capable of, and I had absolutely no intention of putting my weapons away. There were always more monsters hiding in the dark, stealing from the innocent, believing their wealth made them untouchable. They needed to be hunted. I took a deep, steadying breath of the freezing morning air. My voice was steady, powerful, and utterly unyielding. I am done grieving, Marcus. Send the files. I am ready. The ultimate lesson from this journey is that true empowerment comes from reclaiming your own narrative rather than waiting for abusers to change. For years, her family weaponized her loyalty, exploiting her trust to fund their toxic narcissistic ambitions. She did not heal by seeking their elusive apologies or understanding. She healed by enforcing absolute unbreakable boundaries and stripping them of their unearned power. Her calculated retaliation highlights that walking away from toxic bloodlines is not a failure, but a necessary act of profound survival. Share how you will enforce boundaries to protect your peace. Leave thoughts and comment below.